House Committee on Elections will now come to order. The clerk will call the roll.
Chairman Smith.
Here.
Vice Chair Busey. Rep Burrows.
Here.
Rep Capriglione. Rep Dayala. Rep Manuel. Rep Morales.
Here.
Rep Swanson. Rep Vo.
A quorum is present. The opportunity, I want to thank the members for making it in. We have a few absences. I've had lots of communication from all of them. It's just that busy. There's just life going on and business going on and things, but we surely appreciate those of you who are able to make it. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Today, we will be taking invited testimony only. If you are testifying, please make sure you've filled out the electronic witness affirmation form on the registration kiosk in the hallway. If you have any issues filling out the form, please ask a staff member and they will be happy to help. In addition, because there are no bills or resolutions to be considered or voted on during interim hearings, all invited witnesses will register to testify neutrally, as the purpose of these meetings is to gather information in order to compile the committee's interim report. For those wishing to submit electronic public comment, the Committee on House Administration approved a process for the electronic submission and posting of public comments for each item on today's agenda. The public comments submitted through the portal will be posted on the Electronic Legislative Information Systems TLIS and TLO, as well as on the House website at the conclusion of today's hearing. Directions of how to submit public comments on the portal can be found on the meeting notice for this hearing. With that said, welcome to the second interim hearing of the House Committee on Elections for the 88th Legislature. Today, in our agenda, we will be discussing the Secretary of State's audit program's finding as it related to our interim charge covering adherence to Texas election laws. We will also spend a portion of our time discussing the storage and management processes for voter registration data. Lastly, we will have invited testimony only to discuss potential emergent election issues in Texas counties. Members, before we start, does anyone have any comments? All right, seeing none with that, let's go ahead and begin. We'll start with discussing the Secretary of State's audit program's finding as it related to our interim charge covering adherence to Texas election laws. The chair calls Christina Atkins from the Secretary of State's office. Good morning, Christina.
Good morning.
For the record, you are Christina Atkins, and you're testifying on behalf of the Texas Secretary of State in a neutral position. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
All right, go right ahead.
Good morning again. Good morning, members. Thank you all for inviting us to be here today to speak about the election audits that our office has been working on and performing and actually producing some reports that we hope you'd have the chance to review. So in 2021, Senate Bill 1, coming from our Texas legislature, created a provision in Texas law that requires the Secretary of State's office to perform election audits in 4 counties. These are randomized county audits, so these counties were selected at random. It was 2 counties with a population of less than 300,000 and 2 counties with a population of 300,000 or more. In this first round of audits, the 2 counties under 300,000 that were selected were Eastland County and Guadalupe County. Our 2 counties over 300,000 were Cameron County and Harris County. For the last year and a half, our team has been working diligently on reviewing election records, looking at results, looking at training materials to perform a comprehensive analysis of all the elections that were conducted during the defined audit period. For this defined audit period, we're talking about the 2021 and 2022 elections, all elections that occurred in those counties within that time frame. Our audit team consists of a manager and currently 13 auditors, that we have 4 additional openings that we're looking to fill at the moment. All of our auditors worked on each one of these different projects. Our audit team consists of former election officials. We've got data analysts from the medical community. We've got some former financial auditors and other individuals with project management experience. So we have a diverse array of individuals that are looking at and reviewing these different election records. After completing the comprehensive audit for all 4 counties, we did notice some trends that occurred across all counties. The first thing I'd like to mention are some of the areas of needed improvement that we noticed that were consistent across all counties that were audited. all of our counties appear to be doing a very good job with respect to prioritizing election security and performing some contingency planning, incident response planning as it relates to elections and any kind of issues that may impact the election process. But all of our counties that were in the audit need a little bit more work in making sure that these plans and these preparations translate to written documentation. It's very important that we don't just know how to fix things and we don't just know how to pivot to some of our emergency plans. We have to have that in writing so that if our election officials and their staff are unable to, due to some kind of emergency situation, not be present in the office, that any other individual with the county that needs to step in has the ability to do so and take over operations of the election. Additionally, one of the things that we noticed that was consistent across all of our counties is all of our counties could use a little bit more work in making sure that paperwork is completed appropriately in our polling locations. This is a very, very hard thing to do in the election process because it requires a substantial amount of training for our election judges and clerks who already have great responsibilities in that polling place. But the paperwork in a polling place tells the story of the election. And we can't really know what happens in an election if we don't have complete paperwork to demonstrate how chain of custody worked, to demonstrate whether the reconciliation process was completed in a different polling location. And so while many of our counties did a very good job in this area, we did see a few gaps in some of our counties where there could be some improvements in that area. Some of the positive findings that we noted across the board with all of our counties is despite that lack of paperwork on election security is very clearly a priority for our counties. They have done quite a bit of work in the last few years, making sure that they are planning and preparing for different contingencies. To give you an example as to why this is important, in 2024 alone, this year, we have had tornadoes, we have had wildfires, we have had earthquakes, we have had catastrophic storms and flooding, we've had active shooters, we've had bomb threats, we've had telecommunication failures. Everything that I just mentioned has happened during an active election period, during early voting or on election day. So these are persistent issues that we have in our state, in large part because we're a large state and we have a diverse geography and a diverse population. And so we are always going to have more of these issues, particularly when it comes to weather-related events in a lot of our other states and a lot of our other neighboring communities. And so this is something that we have to constantly be thinking about and preparing for, and I think by and large our counties are doing a good job of acknowledging the importance of having these plans. In addition to that, I would also like to address the idea of this culture of self-improvement. In the audit process, it was very clear that many of our counties spend significant amount of time reflecting on the elections that they have and looking for ways to make those elections better. Election officials are constantly self-auditing and self-correcting, and I think this is a great thing that we have, and it was great to be able to see that and acknowledge that, and I'll give you some specific examples when I get into the county-specific findings. And then finally, the completion of list maintenance activities. While we are looking at process and procedure in our counties as it relates to the individual elections that occurred within those counties, we're also looking at their voter registration responsibilities and how they are completing those duties as a whole. And by and large, we saw that counties were engaging in list maintenance activities. They were ensuring that those investigations were taking place, and we could very, very clearly see that they were taking action as appropriate, and that we could see that cancellations were occurring when they had investigated and determined that that was appropriate to do so. There was a bill a couple of sessions ago, Senate Bill 1113. It was from Senator Betancourt. This bill provided monitoring responsibilities on our office, and it gave us some limited enforcement in this area. And it was very pleasing to see that the efforts that our office has put into monitoring completion of list maintenance activities has paid off, and that our counties were taking this very seriously. Now, to talk about some of the specific findings for some of our individual counties, I'm going to start with our smallest county and work up to our largest county. So Eastland County was the smallest county that was chosen to be in this particular round of audits. Eastland County does an amazing job with what they have. As a small county, they have limited personnel in their office to support their election operations. We identified two things that I'd like to share with you all. First, one of the things on the audit that became very clear to us as being something that Eastland County could use a little bit of work on was their storage and maintenance of election records. The county indicated to us, and they showed us the storage location that they have for their records, and it's a storage facility that's shared with other county offices, which means that other individuals outside of the election process have access to election records, and that's something that, from a security perspective, is a little bit concerning to us. In addition to that, the storage room that they were using had some like facility issues. There were some leaks in there that damaged some of those election records. And so we highlighted that in the audit itself as something that the county needs to consider because, as I indicated before, the paperwork in your election is what gives people confidence that the election was completed appropriately. Being able to audit and review those records, and in many cases including previous voted ballots, is an important part of that process. And so we're hoping that the county is able to secure some resources to give the county the space that they need and to secure those records in a secure manner. Additionally, Eastland County, we have noticed over the course of that 2-year period, did a lot of self-auditing. In looking at their records after every election, they identified gaps in their chain of custody procedures. And in reviewing their records, we saw the evolution of their chain of custody paperwork. It became more and more specific with each election. So they were tracking locations, where equipment was assigned, but they were also made great strides in tracking more specific information about the equipment, serial numbers, making sure that the chain of custody sign-offs were proper. And so we definitely recognize the hard work that they've put into that. Moving next to Guadalupe County. Guadalupe County, so our next, second to smallest county that we reviewed for this process. What stood out about Guadalupe County is this county has extensive policies and procedures that are well known by every individual that works in that office. They have an operations manual. Everybody knows the operations manual, and everybody knows what everybody else's job is within the office. And so they have an excellent system of redundancy there so that if they have individuals that are unavailable or out of the office, they have other folks that can very easily step in and take over election process. They do a lot of cross-training there with their internal staff, but in addition to that, they provide really consistent and strong training with their election workers. They reflect and review upon the training that they do with their workers to find improvements so that they can bridge those gaps in future elections. One of the greatest things that we saw in Guadalupe County was something that was actually unrelated to specific process and procedure, but came about from the self-auditing and the review of paperwork and really asking their workers what was necessary to make their election stronger. The county elections administrator in Guadalupe County created what she calls her Citizens Elections Academy. She modeled it after the Citizens Police Academies that you see some of our law enforcement agencies doing, where she now offers periodically throughout the year this process for members of the community to come in and participate and engage in the election process, and she puts them through several weeks of training where they're doing a mock election and everybody serves every role within the process. This has been a phenomenal program in that it's helped bridge that gap from the county to the community and given folks an insight into how the elections work. And it's been a great thing that she's done to build confidence within her community in Guadalupe County that individuals understand and know how the election process works. In addition to that, in this particular county, Guadalupe County, as a result of, I think, reviewing some of their records from the audit process, looking at the preliminary findings that we had for Harris County from November 2022, and part of this kind of culture of self-reflection, the county has modified their training program. In realizing that paperwork is an important part of the process and there was a need to provide more training on paperwork, the county created a pilot program where she offered some additional training. It was an optional training program where she sat with her election judges and clerks and did sample paperwork. Those judges then had the ability to take that paperwork home with them and use them as samples in the election process. This was not part of the paid training program, but her attendance at this optional program was wonderful. Judges wanted that additional information and gave her that feedback that she was looking for, that she was able to bring this into her training program itself. So despite the fact that this is happening outside of the audit period, the activity and the practice of being audited and reviewing her records in preparation from that audit helped her identify some other areas for positive improvement. The next county I wanted to highlight was Cameron County. In Cameron County, there were a few issues that I'd like to address. One area of needed improvement with Cameron County was with respect to submitting information to the team system. In The March 2022 primary election, this was our first election after the implementation of Senate Bill 1, and the first election for which we had more opportunities available to cure mail ballot issues online. That county is what we call an offline county, so they don't interface with the TEAM system, our statewide voter registration and election management system directly. They use a third-party vendor to help with that data exchange. And what we identified in that audit is that some of that information wasn't coming to the state that would have allowed Cameron County voters to utilize that application to make corrections to their mail ballots online. We did identify that this was a one-election problem, though, that Cameron County did make improvements, and that was the only election for which they had those problems, and they remedied that, and so Cameron County voters were able to get the option of fully utilizing these online corrective action options for mail ballots. In addition to that, Cameron County stands out in what they have done to prioritize both physical and cybersecurity in their county. They have strong physical security in their election office and in their election warehouse. They've made great strides in making sure that they have emergency preparedness plans in place, and have really built a strong culture of security within their county. In addition to that, Cameron County has been very strong in utilizing some of the existing federal grants that are out there to supplement their election budget. Department of Homeland Security and other federal agencies have grants that they've made available for emergency preparedness and emergency planning, and the county has made very good use of these grants, and that's something that I think other counties, I hope, will look to because there is a lot of federal funding that could be made available to our local counties in this area. In addition to that, they have one of the strongest election worker training programs that we observed. They spend a lot of time and attention making sure folks in the polling place know process and procedure, know how to complete paperwork. They even go that extra mile and provide training to their workers on communicating with voters, working with voters with disabilities. And then finally, in Cameron County, they have a strong retention program, not only with their internal staff, but with their election workers as well. And that's something that I think is very standout and results in strong quality elections. This is why they have complete paperwork. This is why they have elections that can easily be audited, because they have individuals that are working elections that have an expertise in elections at this point. And then finally, the last county that was part of this audit was Harris County. So I've previously stood before this committee and I've testified on some of our preliminary findings that we had from the November 2022 audit that we did specifically of that November 2022 general election in Harris County. The difference between that audit and this audit, what I'm going to talk to you about today, is that our audit this time was a comprehensive audit. Not only were we looking at one election and identifying issues, but we were looking at all of their process and procedure and seeing if we could identify trends across the board. In some part based on some of the findings from the November 2022 election, but also in independently reviewing that data to see if there were any other issues or any other things that we weren't aware of before that may have been contributing to some of the concerns we expressed in that November 2022 audit. In May of 2021, Harris County acquired a new voting system. They went from paperless DREs, direct record electronic voting systems, paperless voting systems, to a new paper-based system. The name of the system is the Hart Verity system. In this system, voters are given a blank piece of paper. They go to a ballot marking device, insert that blank piece of paper, and they're able to make their selections, and those selections are printed out on that paper. That paper is then deposited into a scanner. This is a big transition to go from a paperless system to a paper-based system, because it changes not just the equipment that's being used, but it adds additional equipment in the polling location, and it adds the component of handling and maintaining security and chain of custody on ballots and ballot supplies. One of the things that we identified as an issue in the way Harris County was conducting their elections is that when they transitioned to this paper-based system in May of 2021, in preparations for that November election, they did not require that their election judges and clerk do hands-on training with this new equipment. They had training modules, in-person training modules available. They also had some recorded videos, but there was no requirement for judges to come in person to interact with the equipment directly. That created some issues that I think began in November of 2021 and that we have seen carried over into additional elections. In November of 2021, this is our special election for our constitutional amendment election. In reviewing some of the technical tickets that were submitted where election judges and clerks identified problems in polling locations, and looking at some of the reports as to what these technical tickets, the resolution for these, we were able to identify that the difficulty that election workers were having because of the unfamiliarity with this equipment contributed to a large number of polling places that had voting period that ceased for a period of 1 hour or more in that constitutional amendment election. In fact, 26 polling places were identified as having a gap of 1 hour or more in voting activity. 23 of those issues were reported due to equipment malfunctions. 3 were because they were missing equipment necessary to open the polling location itself. In fact, this resulted in 17 locations reporting their first voter check-ins on Election Day at least an hour after the polls should have opened. And then the remaining 9 had gaps in voting during the day due to these equipment issues. The fact that there's such a high volume at the beginning of the day, I think, is a strong indication that the training, or the lack of training in this case, played into that as election officials, those that I think have spoken before you and can attest to, those that are here in the audience can tell you, that first hour of the day is one of the most important times in the election process. How your day gets started, how that equipment gets set up, whether your polling place is able to open on time is pretty critical. So knowing that they had these issues, the next major election we went into is the March 1st, 2022 primary election. It does not appear that Harris County made any modifications to the training requirements, and individuals still were not required to participate in the in-person, hands-on component of working with the election equipment. While there were other in-person components judges were required to participate in, they were not required to participate in the second component where they were working hands-on with the equipment. This, combined with the fact that for the March 1st primary election, Harris County had a 2-page ballot, which would have been complicated under any other circumstances, created a very difficult experience for this election for many of our election workers. In fact, 33 locations were identified with gaps of voting of 1 hour or more in the check-in process. Reviewing the corresponding technical tickets, 25 were due to equipment malfunctions. 1 was due to the untimely delivery of needed equipment. 7 were because they were missing or needed additional ballot paper. And 19 of those locations, 19 of those 33, those polling locations, it was that first hour of the day where they saw that problem. They were not able to open on time because of some of the issues that I stated. Again, that first hour of the day is very critical, and so that's also an indication that maybe that unfamiliarity with the equipment was causing problems in getting that equipment set up properly. In addition to that March 1st primary, the issues with polling place issues, or I would say in addition to the polling place issues that occurred with that March 1st primary, there were some other issues that we were able to identify in the audit process. This was our first election for which counties were implementing a reconciliation form at the end of the election process. This was a requirement that came out of Senate Bill 1 from the 2021 legislative year. This reconciliation process required counties to post a reconciliation form at the conclusion of voting on election night, and then an updated form after all of the counting activities had taken place, which would include our late arriving mail ballots for military and overseas voters and any ballots that were part of the corrective action process. There was a major discrepancy that was observed in the reconciliation form that was posted on election night. That discrepancy indicated that there was a 10,000 vote difference between the number of votes cast and the number of voters voting in that election. Now, while this was the first election that counties were utilizing this reconciliation form, we had reviewed a lot of county reconciliation forms to see how this process and this implementation was rolling out across the state. There were no other counties that had a discrepancy that large. The county later spoke to this issue and addressed it, and they had some internal process and procedures, some ballots that were counted but were not included in that final tabulation that resulted in this major discrepancy. It did get resolved by the time the final reconciliation was completed, but it was something that was very, very notable in that process that identified some areas where maybe they need to have better access control procedures, better chain of custody, better verifications along the way.
Can you give us more details about actually what that was, the 10,000 votes?
Yes, sir.
What did they do wrong? How do we have an extra 10,000 votes in Harris County going around?
And it wasn't, yes, sir, that's a great question. And it wasn't an extra 10,000 votes. There was a deficiency.
Okay.
It was an undercount. And what had happened is when the polling place, when all of the equipment is brought in from the polling place, and one of the ballots that have been run through the scanner for voting by mail, after they're tabulated, the results are read onto a thumb drive. And that thumb drive is removed from the scanning and tabulation devices and taken to a central computer where they accumulate all the vote totals to produce the overall reports for an election. And that's where it appears as though something went wrong.
Do we know what that was?
Well, there was a thumb drive that they didn't read. And when we identified this issue, and I remember this issue clearly because our office identified the issue for that primary. So I was aware of this issue outside of the audit period.
Where had the thumb drive gone?
They had the thumb drive. It was in their possession. They just made a mistake when they were reading the thumb drive into that central computer. They missed that thumb drive.
Are we sure the thumb drive was there the entire time and they just, I mean, we've gone back and figured all that out?
From what we reviewed, and even from the counties, from their own investigations at the time, it didn't appear that there was any kind of improper behavior, any kind of intentional wrongdoing with that. There was a lot of activity that was going on, and I think it was very late in the evening, and that's when the mistakes were made.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I think also what you may also be asking, Chairman, is there some type of a procedure for accounting for these thumb drives?
There should be. These are things that the counties have to develop on their own. This is a county-specific process. How they track and monitor the thumb drives that are read into their central system. Some of our counties will use binders with slots where they insert the thumb drives, and they'll have individuals sign off as they're reading them and inserting them just even into the storage mechanism before they read them and run them into their central computer. Some of the counties will have paperwork where they are validating that the results, as generated from this scanner are being read into the main central computer. It varies from county to county, but generally speaking, counties have a process by which they track that.
And what is Harris's,
I
if you know?
I don't recall at the time that they had a lot of paperwork to show us on what that process was. So I can't speak to the details of that, and I think that was probably one of the things that contributed to this mistake happening.
Gotcha.
Yes, sir. That's a summary of some of the issues identified from the March 2022 primary election. Jumping ahead to the March 2024 primary runoff election. Though that's a smaller election, we still identified that there were 9 polling locations that had a gap of voting due to technical issues at the polling location. And then, of course, to conclude, we've got our November 8th, 2022 general election, where we had 21 locations that we identified that had a gap of voting due to equipment malfunctions. Some of them didn't have, 4 additional locations didn't have equipment that was delivered in a timely fashion. 3 didn't have ballot paper delivered in time to set up the polling location by 7 a.m. So 21 locations that culminated in November. This one was definitely much more public-facing. There was a lot more of an awareness of some of the issues that went on there. And in our preliminary findings that we did of just this one election that we released last year, we identified that, again, these equipment issues were persistent. That, with the 2-page ballot, created a lot of issues with the voting experience, lots of spoiled ballots, ballots that were not being read through the scanners properly. In addition to that, the county provided us with information on how they calculated their distribution of paper, and the method that they used was not compliant with state law. In addition to that, the method that they used, even using their own calculations, it didn't appear that they had provided enough ballot paper to the locations, even by their own math in that particular situation.
Was that universal across all the polling locations, or did it favor certain locations that got paper and some that didn't?
So we did map that out and look at the locations where we identified these issues. It wasn't that all of their locations didn't have enough paper by their calculations.
Some did, some didn't.
Some did, some didn't.
Have we looked at any trends or correlation between the ones that got sufficient paper and the ones that didn't?
Yes, sir, we did. In fact, we did that for all of the elections that I just mentioned. We did plot out in our report, we mapped out all of the specific locations so folks could see where that was occurring. We didn't see as much overlap as I anticipated, so it didn't. There are a few pockets where it looks like there are some persistent issues. The northwest corner of the county and I believe the southeast corner of the county had some pockets there where we saw polling place closures repeated for multiple elections. But it wasn't the same locations in every single election.
Thank you,
Representative?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Atkins. Oddly, I want to talk about Harris County. I don't know if you've heard me do that before. So we have 254 counties, but Harris County accounts for approximately a sixth of the population of the state. And what happened in 2022, and now we have some other information because the Harris County DA has actually looked into it with some investigation. So your report says that there were training inadequacies, data inconsistencies with the voter registration system. I want to kind of pause right there. Your report shows that during the audit period, that means after the audit began, right? Harris canceled 45,800 voters who were dead, 880 felons, 1,136 non-citizens, totaling over 100,000 voters from the rolls that were removed from the rolls because they shouldn't have been there to begin with. Did I read that right?
Yes, sir, I believe that's
Okay.
correct.
And again, this type of work happened because of the audit. At least it began after the audit.
So I would say that I would be careful about making that correlation between the two. I think the catching up that a lot of our counties did with respect to list maintenance and really jumping into the list maintenance had less to do with the fact that they were being audited and more to do with the fact that Senate Bill 1113, which I mentioned earlier, one of Senator Betancourt's bills, gave us monitoring requirements on list maintenance activities. And I think we began that list maintenance monitoring in 2021, right after the 2021 session. That was a bill that passed, I believe, in the regular session. And so right after that, we started that monitoring process. And I think that is where we were able to identify areas where counties needed to shore up their data. I would also say one other thing on top of that. So in addition to the fact that that monitoring and that oversight that we have has given us the ability to work with counties and them take it a little bit more seriously, some of our counties that may have been maybe, I don't think intentionally leaving ineligible voters on the rolls, but just not making it a priority. Harris County is what we call an offline county. They use a third-party voter registration vendor.
I was going to get to that. I'm happy you're getting into this.
Yes, sir. When we started this process, we made a policy decision, our office did, to start requiring, it used to be that our counties would periodically do a full sync of their database to the state database because we're required to have all of that voter information in the state system. When we started, I believe it was in June of 2022, and I can double check that date, we, instead of periodically having counties do this full sync, we decided to make it a monthly requirement. And when we did that, that is when we found that there was a discrepancy of over 1 million records between the Harris County local system and the state system. Now, let me just make sure everyone's clear that when I say there's a discrepancy, it doesn't mean that they had a voter that we didn't have. It could be that they had information in a voter record that we didn't have. They were not perfectly aligned. In that 1 year period, though, from when we first started requiring those initial syncs to the point where we were putting together this report, looking at that audit period, they resolved almost all of those discrepancies. And so I think it's a combination of more attention and more due diligence on that list maintenance process combined with legislation, strong legislation that provided some incentive for them to take that very seriously.
You know, the goal here is we want our voters, our residents here in Texas to make sure and to understand that we have the highest standards in our voter integrity and that it's trustworthy and that it's done right. Because when you have that that lack of confidence or suspicion of lack of confidence, that's when the wheels come off. So this is just about confidence. I'm not calling anybody a fraud doer or fraud feeser or election stealer or anything like that. It's about public confidence, because if people don't think their vote counts, they may not show up to vote because they don't think it matters. So specific to 2022, the November election, the Harris County DA, Kim Ogg, actually brought felony charges against an individual, the person responsible for allocating paper ballots to the voting locations. And what they determined, and the Texas Rangers were part of that investigation, as I understand it. And one of the things they determined was that that person was holding 2 full-time jobs, actually billed 26 hours that day, 8 of it to some oil and gas company, and was in the Woodlands most of that election day, something like those. I may not have all the facts perfect, but something like that. And that the election administrator just had no oversight, didn't know what was happening, that someone was, double dipping and having 2 full-time jobs. And that that person also, even though now that we had a full year prior to that, and then some, of elections, decided to allocate the same amount of paper to about 95+% of the voting locations, the same amount of paper, instead of looking at weighted averages of how many people show up to vote here and vote there. And so that turned out to be a disaster. And that election turned out, from a confidence standpoint, to be a disaster, because it was concluded by that investigation that a number of voters were disenfranchised. You can't tell with certainty the number, because it's just an impossibility, but many voters were disenfranchised. Now, that problem got fixed to some extent, because in Harris County, we no longer have the election administrator. Senate Bill 1750 took care of that. And we've had so far with the county clerk, we've had much improved elections, I think, in real time. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir. I would say that the improvement in Harris County can be attributed to 2 different things. I do think it's important to acknowledge Senate Bill 1750 that was passed out of this committee as well, is Senator Betancourt's bill, because that particular change that initiated a change in leadership, I think, is what resulted in improved elections. So that change where we changed leadership, and then the current leadership, the current elected county clerk, Tanisha Hudspeth, she had previously worked in elections before, and she has an unbelievable amount of experience, knowledge, and some tremendous leadership that she's been able to bring into that office. And so I think she was able to identify a lot of issues even prior to any of these audit findings being released that have been remedied. Our office has actually supported Harris County as much as we can in this endeavor to make improvements in their training. I will say this clerk's office did engage with our office immediately and has asked us to review their training materials on numerous occasions for legal compliance. And so though the improvements have occurred outside of the audit period because of her engagement with our office, I can answer that question and speak to the fact that we have seen improvements because I have seen myself the changes in her training program that I think have prevented some of these issues from reoccurring.
This body, we're pretty good at identifying problems. And when we find solutions, and we see now with the little rearview mirror in hindsight that some solutions have come at least to Harris County, it's good to hear. One other area I wanted to focus on was, if you could explain how, either at the county level or at the Secretary of State level, the state level, how are we doing our citizen checks, checking that a voter is a citizen? If you could explain that.
Yes, sir. That's a great question. And that is relevant to the audit process because those are things that we looked at for all of our counties. We are receiving a lot of questions about how we validate citizenship status for our voters. And so, looking at these counties and looking at these reports, I would encourage voters to look at that because I think it is a good case study to show what's been done and to get a sense of the volume of records that are being reviewed in this process. So in 2021, we began a process with our Department of Public Safety, DPS, whereby they provide data to us on a weekly basis of individuals that show up and have a DPS transaction where citizenship is validated. If somebody identifies in that transaction that they are not a U.S. citizen and provides the corresponding paperwork to show that they're not a U.S. citizen, and those individuals were previously registered, so they had a registration date prior to that transaction date, we send that information to our counties for investigation. And so this is an ongoing effort that we started in 2021, and it started with a full review of the database, and then it's continued on with this weekly process where we get information in real time for when individuals self-identify as not being a U.S. citizen, and I think it's important to note, also provide that corresponding paperwork. Our counties have been, it appears from our vantage point at the state, because of our monitoring that we now are required to do and have a little bit more enforcement authority on, our counties have by and large been taking this very seriously. We can't see for all of our counties, again, our offline counties, I can't see what they're doing for investigation, but I can see that we are sending them data and it is resulting in cancellation of records. So this tells me that they are investigating, sending out the required notices, and canceling when appropriate.
Is there something that is done in your office to make sure they're following up on those investigations?
Yes, sir. We, as a result of the generosity of the Texas legislature, the staff in my office has increased from 32 to almost 90 employees this year. This means that I've been able to more than double the number of individuals that I have assigned to work with our team system and to provide county training and monitoring of these activities. And so our folks that support our team system and support our counties in utilizing the team system, which contains our database, they are the ones that are performing these monitoring activities. And so I have a lower ratio of employees to counties, and I have a lot more training now for these individuals. And so we monitor in real time. We check the status of investigations. We check the status of the data that's sent out to the counties to ensure that they are performing those list maintenance activities.
Last one, I promise. To the extent we need to help you all with anything, just let us know, because being the boots on the ground, sometimes there's something that we miss. So if we miss something, let us know. Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, you haven't completed your findings on Harris, have you?
I have more or less come to the end of, I think, the points that were relevant to make for today. So I'm happy to entertain any questions, any other additional questions.
Okay. Members, any additional questions? Representative Morales.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Going back to the 10,000 votes under count, was that in the 2022 or the 2024 primary?
It was in the March 2022 primary.
And, thank you. And if it was in the 2022 primary, was it the Democratic primary or the Republican primary where the USB?
I would have to double check that, but I don't recall on the reconciliation form if they made a distinction between the two. For one of their forms, they had a combined form, even though they had separate primaries, and I can double check that and get you an answer on that.
Can you get my office that
Yes.
answer?
I might
And then
be able to get
also,
you an answer right
if the USB goes missing or is misplaced, does I guess that precinct where is it one USB for one machine where 10,000 votes were cast, or is it that office that had a total for that, election day, the 10,000 votes?
So my understanding of the situation is that it was specific to mail ballots, and so it was information from one of their central scanners. So it wasn't multiple locations.
Okay. So it was the central, okay. And if you actually have it at one of the precinct locations where you can actually do the voting, is there a redundancy or something in place to make sure that if the USB goes missing from, let's say, there to its final destination so that it can be tallied up, that we can go back to the original machines and recapture all that data?
Absolutely. I would say that the greatest redundancy that we have right now is actually the paper ballot. Those ballots are the official ballot of record. And so if there's a problem with the electronic media, more often than not, we go back to the ballots and we rescan them if necessary. That being said, most of our voting system equipment has the capability to have 2 thumb drives where it's writing to both of the thumb drives, and so there's a backup thumb drive within the system that could be used if necessary.
So in this scenario of the 10,000 votes undercount, was it eventually caught and did it?
Yes, sir.
Were you able then to, or the county tally up the numbers without any adverse effect to any one of the candidates that were running?
Yes, sir. So we identified the issue when we were reviewing the reconciliation forms after the election, just to see how this new process was working. When we noticed that a discrepancy was that large in Harris County, particularly in comparison to what all the other counties were posting, we reached out to the county and proactively asked them, said, hey, can you take a look at this? Because that discrepancy is inconsistent with what we would expect from an election on election night and inconsistent with the other counties. And they did. They immediately looked into it and immediately called us and said, we have a problem. And they did the work to discover that it was a thumb drive that didn't get read properly into the system. We actually have a provision in Texas law for when the election results are canvassed, that if there's a discrepancy in the vote totals in that final canvass, and it's a math error, and this essentially was a math error because the ballots were scanned and counted. They just weren't included in that final report. That can be fixed at the canvas. And so there was no need to go back and rescan ballots or find alternative media because the count had been performed and they had records showing that. So they were able to modify that at the canvas and take care of that discrepancy.
Okay, and my apologies, right, since this is not my area, but you're saying the votes were actually counted and tallied, but the USB drive was not read.
It was correct. So they were tallied and counted in the scanning device, and there were reports that you could generate to show those counts. So we know what the counts were for those ballots, but when they were producing the final reports to show the final totals for the election, that was not included in that accumulation of the final reports.
Okay.
It's like somebody had tallied them up. If we were talking about hand counting, it would be like if you tallied them up and you had your totals, but you forget to add that into your final result. That's the equivalent of what happened.
Got it. Okay. I do have more questions, Mr. Chair. Can we talk about there's been a lot of recent news coverage and articles with respect to the possibility of non-citizens registering.
Yes, sir.
And more specifically, not in my district, but very close to South Texas, we had some recent articles that came out and search warrants that were issued by the Attorney General's office and that have raised some concerns, and I've been receiving some communications with respect to that. Does the Secretary of State have any concerns right now or seen from these 2 audits in 2022 and 2024 where we need to refocus more funding or more efforts at addressing non-citizens registering? Are you seeing it as a big issue that requires the attention of this committee to provide either more funding or more resources to the Secretary of State?
Well, I would say that from a resource perspective, again, thanks to the generosity of the legislature, we have made great strides in our resources in being able to support our counties. That being said, anytime I can put more individuals looking at and working on our system, the better off we're going to be. So, and in light of the fact that there may be more put on our office during the next legislative session, I just always want to be mindful of that. Our resources they got us to where we needed to be, but anything more, any other additional requirements in our office would likely need a little bit of additional support. But what I would say on top of that, beyond this idea of just additional resources, I think one of the most important things, and I appreciate the opportunity to answer this question in this setting with the committee in a public forum, one of the most important things that I think that we can do in this area is to highlight the work that the counties have been doing. Texas is very good at list maintenance activities. We have strong, clean voter rolls. And there are always ways that we can make improvements, and we are constantly seeking out ways to improve our list maintenance and to improve our verification of voter eligibility. But that being said, for many, many, many years now, Texas has been, I think, on the forefront of making sure that we have the right data sets, that they are properly and securely validated. So we're not talking about what we call weak matches. We are making strong matches to make sure we're identifying the right individuals so that we're not overbroad in sending out investigations and notices. And I think that that story is not being told publicly. And so I think if you look at the data that we have, you look at the cancellations that our office has made with respect to ineligible voters in the last 4 years, you will see the strength of this program. You know, we have a lot of states right now, Virginia, I think, Alabama, Ohio, that have all this year started non-citizen eligibility list maintenance programs that were in large part based on the Texas program. Many of them use the Texas model to implement those programs. And I think in those states that weren't doing that, that's why you see a high number of identified non-citizens and a high number of cancellations in this area.
I get it, yeah.
In Texas, we've been doing this for many years.
Yeah.
So we are already very much at the forefront in that area, and we are getting information almost in real time from DPS on this to help make sure that our voter rolls are strong and accurate, because that's the foundation of a strong election.
So you feel comfortable with the steps that are in place at the county level and I guess throughout our agencies, DPS working in conjunction with the Secretary of State to be able to capture any anomalies like non-citizens registering to vote?
Yes, under our current laws and with the data that's available, our other partners, our other state partners like DPS, for example, have been very good in working with our office to make sure that we're meeting those legal requirements. We are always looking to see if there's additional data sets. We're actually in discussions with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, TDCJ, about potentially getting some additional data from them on felony individuals that are on probation with felony convictions, because identifying these individuals that are ineligible doesn't just make for a strong voter registration list, it also prevents individuals from potentially making mistakes that could impact them negatively too. Mm-hmm. And so the fresher that data is, the better it is. So we're always looking at some other avenues like that. But compared to other states, we're in much better shape than I think many other states are.
And you haven't seen a drastic increase that would concern you with respect to your audit in 2024. I'm taking the position of this is after a number of migrant surges that we've had on the Texas border. And so I'm trying to make sure that there's been no anomaly or, let's say, an increase or a peak in non-citizens actually registering, as some of the articles have tried to allude.
What I would say to that is our data for cancellations, the categories for which we cancel voters, or I would say the categories for which the counties cancel voters, because most of that activity is done on a county basis. All of that is public data, and we post those monthly reports on our website. And so anybody can go online and review our cancellation trends to see what categories have what number of cancellations. What I can say is we look at that data pretty regularly to look for potential issues or anomalies. We have not seen any unusual activity. Everything has been consistent with what it has been for the last few years.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the Texas Attorney General's voter fraud unit? That they
Yes,
have
sir.
a voter fraud unit?
Yes, sir.
Does the Secretary of State have to work closely with that voter fraud unit in instances of finding anomalies and directing or forwarding either material or investigation for a possible more thorough investigation by them?
Yes, sir. I mean, we're not an investigative agency. There's limits to what we can do in information gathering. We also have a statutory obligation to provide referrals to the Attorney General's office when we are presented with complaints indicating potential criminal conduct. So we have an obligation to provide data to them and provide information to them when we're in possession of it. So we do work with them pretty regularly. They ask a lot of questions too about, the complexity of Texas law to make sure they better understand it in their investigations. And so we are in regular communication with them.
Got it. And in doing so, One of the recent articles that I read stated that the last fiscal year, the voter fraud unit spent $2.3 million in prosecuting 4 cases related to possible election fraud. Are you familiar with that?
I've read the article, but I don't know as much about their day-to-day operations. We just provide them that information, and then I'm not involved in what happens with it when it gets there.
To me, 4 cases and what, let me backtrack. I agree with my fellow colleague, Ayala, that we need to make sure that there's integrity in the voter process system. But the amount of news that this is gathering, and specifically by certain individuals, and then when I find out or I read an article that you would think that this is happening massively and on every day in the state of Texas, and then when you hear that in the entire last fiscal year there were 4 cases prosecuted, and it resulted in Texas taxpayers a waste of $2.3 million in that. I did the average on that. That would be $575,000 per case. You have 1, 2, 3, I believe, attorneys that are up here. $575,000 is a ton of money. And so I'm wondering if those are the right resources that are being spent in a voter fraud unit by an attorney general that I understand is still under criminal investigation. And that's my concern. So my question to you, are you currently, or does the Secretary of State currently have any pending material or requests for an investigation that have been sent to the voter fraud unit or to the Attorney General that have not been addressed, or that you're saying these are backlogged, they haven't been seen, and I don't think that the Attorney General or the voter fraud unit is doing enough to address the issues that we are forwarding from the Secretary of State?
I would say I have no indication that they're not moving forward with investigations. I have no indication that they're not doing what they need to be doing with the data that we've been sending them, because they routinely ask us questions. They make sure they understand what's being provided to them. So I have not seen, from my experience with the Attorney General's office, any communication issues or any indication that they're not doing what's required under Texas law. But I think respectfully, sir, I think more specific questions about their internal process and procedure, I think you may want to direct to them, because I'm just not knowledgeable as to what their internal operations are like.
And you're with a different agency, so I understand.
Yes, sir.
Did you also read the article or happen to have information with Fort Worth and this and Weatherford, supposedly the article based on a Fox News commentator mentioning that there were people parked outside of DPS with tables registering non-citizens? Was that brought forward as a formal complaint to the Secretary of State for investigation, and was that investigated?
No, sir, that complaint did not come from our office. So I read the same articles, and I did read the news release from the Attorney General's office, but it wasn't an investigation prompted by anything that we provided to them.
Now, the Republican official that was in charge, I believe, there in Weatherford, responded that the allegations were erroneous and that nobody was there, and if they had a table outside of the DPS office, they would have been asked to leave. Is that your understanding of the processes that are in place for DPS, or that if they were to call the Secretary of State, is that what you would also recommend to DPS or employees?
So I don't know how to answer that question, because I think that's more about internal DPS policy with respect to what is allowed or not allowed on government property. There's nothing in the election code that would speak to that issue directly.
Okay. I think that's all the questions that I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions, members? Thank you, Christina, for the huge amount of work that went into compiling this report. Thank you to you and your staff and the secretary. I mean, it's just great. I know y'all were doing everything possible to get that for our hearing today, and,
Yes, sir.
and I appreciate the effort. So do we have, going back to Harris County, do we have someone from the Secretary of State's office in the Harris County Elections Office currently?
No, they don't have an active election taking place right now. Generally speaking, we talk to Harris County every day in our office, generally speaking, either with respect to compliance questions or especially in looking at data with our state voter registration system. In addition to that, during all of our elections, during early voting and through Election Day, we typically have individuals stationed in Harris County during that time. We'll have state inspectors assigned to Harris County, just like we would any other just like we would any other county across the state. And then I also have some individuals within our office that provide training, our security trainers that help train on chain of custody, policy, and procedure, that oftentimes will be on site in case issues come up during the election process where they can be of assistance.
Okay. So at this time, just to kind of summarize the Harris County situation, we do not have an elections administrator. What we do have is we have a county clerk who's running the elections like many counties in Texas.
Yes, sir.
Right. She came and testified at the last hearing we had. At that time, my summary take on it was that the Secretary of State's office was satisfied to that point with her conduction of the office. And what I'm hearing you say today is that we think heading into November that so far so good currently.
Generally speaking, yes, sir. I think both the county and I think our office would agree that the partnership that we have has been to everybody's advantage, to the voters' advantage primarily in Harris County, where we can help address issues in real time. I will say the county's been very forthcoming with giving us access to anything that we've asked for, any records that we've asked for. Very, very cooperative. And I think it is our intention that we maintain that and maintain kind of an active presence in Harris County to provide confidence to our voters, and I think also to provide easy access to our office, to the county, should they need us during the election process, should issues arise where they might need some additional guidance or assistance from the state.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't get to ask
Representative, go
questions
ahead.
about Harris. So thank you for that. And that brings me to, have you all, in cooperating with the county clerk, developed a plan for Harris County so that moving forward, the concerns that have been expressed by some of the colleagues up here, let's say for the paper ballot distribution, do we have a plan in place for November so that that doesn't happen again?
I would say that the county has a plan in place. And I think the county clerk has now done, I believe, 6 elections since she's assumed that role. Those 6 elections were not part of this audit. Despite that fact, the county clerk has invited us into the county elections office, invited us into her training program, and been very forthcoming with information that we have been asking for. And since that time, since the clerk has assumed operations, I'm not aware of any complaints or any issues that are of the same of the same nature described in this audit report. I'm not aware of any, I have no indication that these issues have repeated since the clerk has taken over. And we've had folks present in Harris County during the election, so typically we would hear about those issues, if not from the clerk directly, we would still hear about it, and we're not getting reports of any of the same issues.
So the paper ballot distribution has gone well. There's been more than
Yes, sir.
enough paper ballots in every place where the voting will be or has taken place.
Yes, sir. To my knowledge and from what's been reported to my office, we have not seen that issue repeat.
And in the audit findings that you mentioned from 2022 and 2024 with respect to Harris, I'd like to go back to you uncovered certain pockets, as you mentioned, on the northeast, I believe, and on the northwest,
Northwest, and I believe southeast.
okay, and the southeast. But the Secretary of State didn't find that there was specific targeting, let's say, of a certain precinct that voted or tended to vote a particular way, or did they?
No, sir. The records that we reviewed did not indicate that there was any kind of intentional effort to modify the supplies or modify the equipment or training to exclude or include any particular precincts. It was pretty uniform across the board in some of these issues.
Got it. So
Yes,
it
sir.
wasn't targeted to a specific voter type of turnout in that precinct
It did not appear to be
for one party or
targeted.
the other.
No, sir, and I think if you look at the data from the primary election, those polling place closures, this was in November of 2022, were even though they were part of the countywide polling place program, certain, areas are identified. You can look at the precinct to see voting trends as to which one would be more Democratic leaning or Republican leaning, and it was happening to both parties.
Got it. All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So now, SB 1933, it's my understanding, the last time we talked, has not been triggered. Is
I
that
would-
correct?
Yes, sir, I would say it has not been formally triggered.
Right.
I think the informal mechanisms that have been in place have been almost the equivalent in the sense that they've invited us into the office without the need for us to demand entrance
Well,
into
that's
the
what I was,
office.
that's what I
Yes,
was going to
sir.
ask you. Essentially,
Are we
even
talking
though.
about Harris County specifically?
Yeah, we're back, yes, we're talking about Harris County. Yeah, I just wanted to make the
Yes,
point
sir.
that that's the level of cooperation we're getting. It's as if SB 1933 had been triggered.
Yes, sir.
The level of interaction and cooperation, and we feel like that will continue going on into the November election.
Absolutely. I have a lot of confidence that those communications have been free-flowing between our office and the county office, and because we haven't seen this repetition of issues, I don't think there's any reason why that communication would change. All that being said, I do think it's important, when you issue a report like this, right, going into a presidential election, folks could look at this report and think that these are still ongoing issues. It doesn't appear that these issues have been repeating. It appears as though that the clerk and her staff has addressed these issues and that they did so on their own prior to this audit report coming back through their own evaluation of policy and procedure related to elections. But we are still going to have a presence in Harris County for this election. I think that's important that we have had one and we will continue to have one, and we acknowledge that this is a presidential election year. And so we will have an increased presence in Harris County like we will in all of our big counties in Texas.
Okay. Now, as a result of your findings in this audit, is there anything from the legislature statutorily in the next session that you see as a need?
Yes, sir. I think there's something that may be worth a discussion. So this audit period that we were reviewing was 2021 and 2022. And so here we are in 2024 releasing a report about what happened before. Now, the county that we had identified some of the most persistent issues in was Harris County. Harris County had already, made it very well known that they wanted to work with our office. They wanted to address these issues. So all of the knowledge that I have in about what Harris County has been doing to fix this has been because the county has been willing to provide it and work with us. What I wonder is if maybe we need to think about that audit period. Instead of doing 2 years preceding, it might be more effective to do 1 year back and 1 year forward, where we audit, the major elections that happen, and then we allow the county to go in and, make potential changes if we need to, and then we can go back and look at what their next elections look like, so we can see if the recommendations were implemented. Some kind of ability to monitor and ensure that counties are making required changes, particularly if there's legal compliance issues. That might be a more effective way of conducting the audits. So it may be worth a policy discussion there.
Okay. Anything else? Right offhand.
No, I think that's the main thing, sir. I would like in all of our counties, even, in our smaller counties that have had maybe not as many issues to address, I would love to be able to see how they're addressing it. I think one of the most interesting findings to me out of this whole process was Eastland County and how that elections administrator on her own, identified a problem with her paperwork and diligently worked every election to make it better. And so I would love to see, now that she's gotten a little bit more feedback from us, what she's going to continue to do. Because I think that she's going to continue to work towards compliance. That was her attitude towards elections.
Good. Generally, have you seen a positive response from the counties as a result of their understanding of this audit program being out there?
Yes, sir, I think so. We had our election law conference this summer, and we invited all 4 counties to sit on a panel and talk about the audits and gave them kind of free rein to talk about their experience. It is hard to be audited in that it takes a lot of time and energy from a document production standpoint to be able to produce these records for our office. Larger counties it's going to be a larger burden for them. And so I think they gave some good feedback to other counties that might be undergoing audit the next round of counties, because we did select our next 4 counties for audit. Gave them some good feedback on how to prepare for it, but by and large, our counties have indicated to us that the process of being audited has given them insight into their process and helped them identify areas of improvement, that it wasn't as painful as they thought it was going to be.
Good. Okay. Members, any other questions? Representative Day Young.
And thank you again for all this. This has been very helpful. You know, we talk about, there was a gentleman I worked with once on the Texas Board of Criminal Justice who said, we don't tread water even if we're doing it well. We're always getting better. We're always getting better. And even though you haven't used those exact words, that's exactly what I've heard you say all day today, is we're always improving, and working with our counties to improve. And that is wonderful to hear. The 2 areas, though, and again, the goal being, and I start with this almost every time we talk, and that is, I want the voting public to be confident, to be assured. Perception is reality, right?
Yes, sir.
So that's the goal here, and that our elections be run right and well. And it sounds like we're making, at least in Harris County, and that's the area that we've spent most of our oxygen the last 18 months I've been in this position. But it sounds like we're having a lot of improvements in Harris County. We focused a ton on at the ballot, on election day and in early voting. And we've touched on some, not nearly as much, at the registrants, at the voter rolls. Today we talked a lot more, I think, than we have in the past about what we're doing to make sure that those rolls are as accurate as they can be. Is there anything left about that you haven't said today that you would like to, as far as what we're doing going forward to make sure this sinking and reconciliation, and to make sure that it just doesn't sink, but that the county is doing what they're supposed to do, whether it's Harris County or any other county?
So we've touched on this subject a few times, and I actually expected to talk about it more with the next item that we have on the agenda. But I will say I think there's some opportunities there for discussion, and I think if people understood a little bit more about how our voter registration system works in Texas, our counties that directly use our system versus counties that use vendors, I think that's a good discussion to have, because anybody that uses a third-party vendor, I don't have as much insight into what they're doing from a list maintenance process or on a day-to-day level, and that's where we have those problems where we get records that are out of sync. And so it's probably worth having a discussion at some point about whether that's the right setup for us in Texas, and if we decide that it is, how can we make that process a better process?
I'm happy to have coffee whenever you like.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Keep going back.
No, that's okay. Representative Morales.
Real quick, Ms. Christina, you mentioned there's 4 new counties that have been selected. Is that
Yes, sir.
public information? And
It
can
is.
you name them?
Yes, sir, I can. Brazoria County and Bell County are our 2 counties, 300,000 and over in population. And our 2 smaller counties are Real and Valverde.
It's going to be my district.
Yes, sir.
All right, second, I understand that the elections administrator in Maverick County, in our March primary, we had a freak thunderstorm take place on the runoff
Yes, sir.
date. And so we had issues all night.
Yes, sir.
Since there was no electricity. And I think finally we were able to get the data results like at 6 or 7 in the morning. It was
Yes, sir, I
some
remember.
crazy-
We
okay.
were up.
You were up
Yes,
too?
sir.
Okay. Wow. Thank you for that. I wasn't aware the Secretary of State was also that actively
Oh, yes, sir.
involved in that.
We don't go to bed. We have a team that stays up. We're right there with our counties.
I appreciate
Mm-hmm.
that. And so in doing that, does the Secretary of State have any assistance that it can offer small counties like Valverde and Maverick County and throughout West Texas? Most of my other counties also with very small funding, very small resources on these voter tabulation machines. It seems they either need an upgrade or maybe new systems. Is that something that you all facilitate or have available on your website to where you can direct them and say, these are good machines, they work well in other places,
Yes, sir.
and here we've gotten pricing for you all at the state level?
Well, not quite to that level, but we do certify the systems. So we test them, and the only equipment that they're able to purchase in Texas are those that have been certified by both the federal government and the state. So we have that information on our website as to what's certified and what equipment they can procure. And then I think the election community in Texas in particular is very strong and very well connected. We are definitely a local control state. Counties have all of the decision making about how to run their election, what equipment they use, as long as they're compliant with state law. But there's a lot of support within the community from other counties assisting other counties. And I think that's one of the things that we strongly encourage is that they participate in their associations and that they rely on some of the expertise of some of their other equivalents that might be able to give them more specific feedback on the vendors than at the state that I can give them. Because I know the equipment from a certification perspective, our counties know it in a different way since they're in charge of procurement.
Is there a specific individual that I can provide the contact information at the Secretary of State's office to my elections administrator down in Maverick County to see if they can work together and
Absolutely.
figure out what resources or what type of
Absolutely.
machine or equipment upgrades they need so that this doesn't happen in November?
Yes, sir. I've got a team of individuals, 2 or 3 folks that we can get on the case to help them work on this.
Is that something we can work
Yes,
offline?
yes, sir. Absolutely. I'll get you that information.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Don't run off, but I'd like for us to move on to the storage and management processes of voter registration. Do you need a couple minutes of a break or something?
It's up to you all. I'm happy to continue on if we need to.
Okay, all right. Well, we're going to go ahead and talk about storage and management processes. And the chair calls Christina Atkins from the Secretary of State's office. That is you, and you are here in a neutral position. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
All right, go ahead.
All right. Again, thank you for this opportunity to speak on this particular issue when we're talking about the storage and management of data in our statewide voter registration and election management system. So federal law requires that we have a statewide voter registration database. At its most basic level, that's where the requirement comes from. We also have a substantial amount of state law that provides specifics as to what that database must do and what it must be capable of doing to support our counties. In addition to that, over the last probably 10 years, what we have noticed is that what used to be just a statewide voter registration system has gradually started expanding to a full-scale election management system. As not only do we have voter registration data in the system, but we've got information about candidates, information about election night reporting, information about different districts. It's just growing in kind of what the overall system is. Historically, when we first debuted our statewide voter registration system, it did not have some of the technological advances that maybe some of our third-party vendors had that were out there at the time. And so many of our larger counties, we also had, I think at the state, it's important to note that we also had some capacity issues. It's hard to manage a database that large, and we just did not have the technology and resources to, I think, build the Cadillac, if you will, of statewide voter registration systems. We had a good system and it met legal requirements, but because of capacity issues and I think features, a lot of our counties opted to use a third-party vendor. Now, the way this works is they use a third-party vendor for day-to-day management of their system. They provide a daily file to us that contains all of the new registration updates and changes so that our system should be identical to what's in that local system. As we've talked about with respect to the audits, what we know is that even though there is the intention that these databases are identical, it doesn't always work that way. We have made great strides to try to improve that by requiring our counties do a full database sync with our office at least once a month. We have some of our large counties that do it as much as twice a week to try to make sure that those systems are equivalent. But there's always going to be discrepancies in data when you're operating 2 different systems. Right now in Texas, we have 33 what we call offline counties. These are the counties that use this third-party vendor. The great majority of those counties utilize one specific vendor, and the name of that vendor is Votech. I think this is not a surprise. I believe we referenced this in the last hearing, but there were some news articles in the spring regarding some financial difficulties that this particular company was having. This particular company had asked their Texas clients to pay a surcharge that was not a traditional part of their contract to help the company maintain operations. As a result of some of those news articles and some concerns within the election community, a couple of things happened. We did start hearing from counties, more counties that wanted to come into the state system. And we have currently been onboarding some additional counties where they're leaving their third-party vendor and coming directly to the state. Out of concern for the large-scale data that they have, some of those counties have actually opted to leave that particular vendor and go to another vendor. We are also in the process at the state of building the next generation of our voter registration system. This system should debut in spring of 2025. We'll start the training and rolling it out early in the spring, so it will be fully implemented by the time our next big election rolls around. The system that we're building now, in understanding that it has more requirements than it needs to, and in just utilizing more modern technology, with a really, really high priority on ensuring security of the system, is going to be a lot more comprehensive than our current system. We have a lot of counties that have currently expressed a desire to come directly into the state system once this new version has come out. The more counties that utilize exclusively our state system, the better we can perform required monitoring activities. To give you an example, right now for an online county, if we're talking list maintenance, citizenship list maintenance, we provide data to these counties to investigate these potential matches. With our online counties, I can see when that county generates a letter and prints out a letter, so I know that something's getting mailed to a voter. So I can see more about the process that it takes where they're going from A to B in that investigation process. So I can see what they're doing. With our offline counties, I can't see any of that. All I can see is that the final resolution. And so I think that's something to think about from a data management perspective, depending on the asks that the legislature has for our office, more monitoring or more involvement in some of these processes. That's something that I think counties need to also consider in evaluating their options on the long term. The other thing I will say with respect to this VOTEC issue is we became concerned just in thinking about potential contingencies for our November election, not specific to one vendor, with any vendor, and there are other offline vendors that are out there. Any time a county is not utilizing our system as their primary form of voter registration, we want to make sure that we always have the ability to step in should they have a problem with their vendor at any point in time. So this summer, we actually worked on a big contingency backup where we backed up all of the data from these offline counties into our system, a one-time pull of all of the, what we call the street indexes. We have all their voters already in our system, but we don't have everything mapped out as to what address is in what district. That's all maintained in their local system. And so we did a one-time pull of that data for all of our counties into our state system so that should anything happen between now and November with any vendor for any reason, that we can at least provide a snapshot as of this summer so our counties are not in any kind of catastrophic situation. And I think, again, with whatever we decide going forward or with whatever the legislature decides going forward long-term is the right solution for Texas, I think it's important that we think about that there is more monitoring capabilities for those counties that utilize the state system. It's also, at this point, at this time, there's no charge for the state system. And then beyond that, if we want to allow a system where we're still allowing counties to have these third-party vendors, we need to think about maybe creating some required processes for contingencies and backup to make sure that that data is secure and consistent across our counties and across the state system.
Members, any questions? Representative Dayala.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our tech person isn't here right now, so I'm going to try to fill that role as best I can, and it's not going to be very good. What I hear you saying is, it sure is a lot easier with folks that use our system.
Mm-hmm.
And of the 33 counties that don't, those counties are currently dwindling a little bit. That is, some more are coming on board, and some are going to another vendor other than, is it VOTEC?
Yes, sir.
And I think what I hear you saying is some of the largest counties are with third-party vendors.
Yes, sir. And I think initially that was probably the right move for them
Right.
when our system didn't have the capabilities that it has
Fair
now. We're hoping that we can build with our new system something that has all the bells and whistles, something that has the security, and has the capabilities that'll make our system, the state system, the most attractive system for our counties, where they desire to be a part of it.
And cost-effective.
Yes, sir, and cost-effective.
That's number one. Number two is, that's what you hope to be, everyone's on the state system, right?
Yes, sir.
That's your hope and prayer, right?
Yes, sir.
That'd be the easiest in making sure that our voter rolls are accurate, consistent, and in sync with the state. We don't have conflict. Whether it's wrong or not, there's always going to be some conflict.
Yes, sir.
But the second tier is making sure if you go to a third-party vendor, that third-party vendor knows how to communicate with us as well as possible, so that it can be as seamless as possible. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, sir. And we do some limited testing, I would say it's certification with the lowercase c, of these third-party voter registration vendors. We don't have a lot of strong statutory authority to do a bigger certification with them. And that may be something to think about. If that's the model that we want in Texas that allows these third-party vendors, we may want to think about imposing stronger certification requirements, specifically with respect to security and maintaining confidential information, because this database, I mean, is full of PII, personal identifiable information for voters. So making sure that they're secure and that they're managing that data appropriately.
Okay, I'll buy the second cup of coffee on that one, okay?
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you so much, Ms. Atkins.
Yes, sir.
Why are we not mandating that all counties get onto the state system? Do we not have a state law requirement already in place?
So we have a requirement to maintain the centralized database, and all of our counties utilize TEAM, which is the name of our system. We have everybody's voter data in there, but they're not using it as their primary way of voter registration management. We have some language in the law that gives them the ability to use a third-party vendor if necessary, some broad language. So I don't have the ability under Texas law to restrict the counties to only using
At this time?
yes, sir, at this time.
But, okay.
At this time.
Putting me to work.
But what I'm hearing is, we now have the system that can handle it all.
Yes, sir. I do think that that's important to acknowledge, is that in the past, I think it was necessary, and these third-party vendors served a role and did I think a good thing for Texas, and because of the capacity issues that we had. But our system doesn't have those limitations now.
Okay. And do you have a list of those? I wrote 21, but I heard.
So we have
is it
33? 33.
Okay. Do we have a list that can be shared with the election committee members of those 33?
Yes, sir, absolutely. I will tell you, generally, it's our larger counties that use the third-party vendors. But yes, we can provide a list to you.
And is it because they provide some additional, I guess, resources or information that the state system doesn't?
Yes,
even
sir. I
though the
think
state system is
originally
free?
they did. They had more bells and whistles. They could do a little bit more with that data. A lot of them use that. They would use electronic poll books in the polling place, and it had more of an integration with their voter registration system with the local electronic poll book. Our new system, I think, is on par or may exceed, I think, what even some of the current vendors are. I mean, it is our goal to build the best system possible that has those features and has the security and the capacity to handle all of our counties.
So you testified that, out of these 33 offline counties, you all had to do like a massive data, download of all their information so that you could, or the Secretary of State could have it.
Yes, sir. So,
Did that
yes, sir.
result in additional expenses to the Secretary of State as well as?
Yes, sir.
As the counties and having to communicate and work with you all?
There was an additional expense to us at the state to do that because it was a big project, but we felt it was necessary from a contingency perspective. So yes, there was a price tag on that for the state.
And with the Secretary of State, based on that and trying to be the most cost-efficient, cost-effective, in terms of what we're doing here, would the Secretary of State recommend that we consider legislation for all counties to be on the state system? Or do you feel comfortable that the current law and the current statute is all right, and now with your upgrades, that you'll be able to seamlessly transfer information with those offline counties?
So I would say two things to that, sir. One, we are trying to build a system that we hope is attractive enough and has the features and it's the right price, in that we're not charging right at this moment, so that counties want to be part of this state system, and that we promote that voluntarily. The second point I would have to that is, as part of the Secretary of State's office, we can't take a position on legislation, but I do think that there's a policy discussion there that may be worth having.
Right. I understand you can't take a position. Just, I guess, generally, if you know, how much money had to be spent in order for you all to do what you just testified as far as
The contingency backup?
data
I
backup.
can provide you some data on that. I don't have those numbers right off the top of my head, but we can get you that today.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
One little rifle shot. What I'm hearing is, when people are using the state system, whether there is follow-up in correcting their roles, whether you are blind to some of that when they're not using your system.
Yes, sir. When they're not using our system, I'll know that there was a resolution
Right.
because I'll see cancellations, but I won't be able to know what they did to get there.
Thank you.
So are you at all familiar with the terms, in terms of length of time of these contracts with these third-party vendors?
I am not. Those are not contracts that have to be filed or approved by our office, so that's all maintained locally.
Do you know what's customary in that respect? I mean, is it customary to enter into a year, 2 year, three,
I think generally speaking, that's what has been communicated to me. Some of our counties recently that have opted to transition to the state system didn't have contract issues in coming to the state system.
They did not?
They did not have contract issues.
Okay, all right.
Mr. Chairman, I've also noticed from now wearing my attorney hat on and working with some of these clients that are actually working with local government agencies and state agencies, I've seen a shift in the last 3 or 4 years from moving with long-term contracts. It used to be like we draft them 2, 4, 5-year contracts, and now we're seeing what's called like subscription agreements that call for like 30-day or 90-day notice by either party where they could terminate them. Yeah, we're moving in a different direction is what has been my experience from wearing my attorney hat.
Awesome. Well, it'd just be nice if the legislature decided to mandate membership, that we don't have a lot of those to stumble over. So anyway, any other questions, members? Thank you, Christina, very much.
Thank you.
At this time, the chair calls Heather Hawthorne.
I saw Heather shaking her head.
Thank goodness we can get out of some of those long-term contracts.
Ma'am, you're Heather Hawthorne. You're here on behalf of the Chambers County Clerk's office, because you are the Chambers County Clerk,
Yes, sir.
and you are testifying neutrally. Is that all correct?
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
And I'm also here to represent the County and District Clerks Association
That's right.
and the 254 individuals that run elections in Texas. So basically, on the storage and management issue, I am an online county, have always been an online county, was actually 10-plus years ago when the team system was created, and I was on that committee to give the user side of what would make this system a little better. Unfortunately, the state didn't provide the money that it needed back then to add all the bells and whistles that were available at the time at that current technology. So that is probably what's created the gap. I am so looking forward to the spring with the new team. We're calling it Team 2.0. I don't know what Christina wants us to call it. Because I know just from conversations with Christina and the staff that it is going to provide those bells and whistles. And a quick example, because I'm not techie either. I thank God that I have people for that. But on our current system, if you go to look at an address and make sure you've verified that address is in your county, and especially those addresses that are on the county line, we have to go to Google Maps or some other GIS system to find it. in the new team system, evidently, look at Christina, she's all smiles now. Yes, that's going to be all in that same package, yeah. So I think that to defend my 33 colleagues that are offline counties, I think that's what really was the issue, is the volume that they had because of their number of voter registrations and the bells and whistles that weren't in the original project, if that helps clarify that. And then anything else that I would like to add is that through a lot of training that we have had over many, many sessions of trainings on the team system, obviously, I feel like this next spring is really going to bring everybody into the fold on that training because it's going to be new even to the old guard like me. So I feel like everybody's going to have a great opportunity to start from scratch. Unfortunately, we do have issues in Texas where we do change leadership either as the clerk or the tax assessor or the EA. And so sometimes that transition of training doesn't always take place. And so I really look forward to the spring and the new system. One of the best practices that we've implemented, and we started implementing this probably 2 years ago, is even though we have that electronic means of looking at voters, voter registration during early voting and election day, we go ahead and print our voter rolls for that backup in case of any kind of catastrophe, that we still have that information in front of us. So I will entertain any questions.
Members, any questions?
So it seems you have a lot of experience with respect to the training also in that. And so I guess more so for these 33 counties, and I don't know who they are, but let's have no surprises. Are you aware, I understand that the Texas offers it at no cost right now, but have you all in your meetings discussed the possibility, and so that we can all be upfront, especially for these 33 counties, are you all talking about the possibility of Texas and charging something to each one of these counties now when they fall into the state system?
No, sir, we haven't had those discussions about having, as they onboard, is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Having them pay into it?
Correct.
No, we've never paid into it to begin with. So even 18 years ago when I started in this business, I mean, it's always been a free system.
Okay. And there's been no discussions with, okay, let's move from a free system to now it's going to be based on population for a particular county or anything like that?
No, sir.
I'm trying to provide the right testimony and questions here so that we can incentivize those 33 counties.
Absolutely. And I really love all those 33 counties that are on it. And the witness that you have next is a great example of a county onboarding is one of those 33 counties. So yes, it would behoove, in my simplistic mind, it would make a lot of sense that we have one system, just like we have one system to get your driver's license. So,
And it's a techie question. I'll hold off.
yeah,
because
don't ask me that.
Just want to make sure if we are going to move into one system, and maybe the next speaker will have this in mind, we need to make sure that we have the right parameters and the right firewalls or whatever is necessary so that that does not become, subject to
Absolutely.
attack.
And Representative Morales, I believe it was 2 sessions ago, we spent $22 million on that system to provide that security that we needed. And so we have fought to keep the user base very tight on that system so that people just don't have access to that system. There were several pieces of legislation that even came up, and I argued that we don't need any more fingers in that system than necessary.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
No other questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. The chair calls Jennifer Dwinoff. All right. Yeah. Jennifer, you are Jennifer Dornoff. You're the Hayes County Election Administrator. You're here on behalf of the Texas Association of Election Administrators and yourself. Is that all correct?
That is correct.
All right.
And we are rebranding ourselves Texas Association of County Election Officials. So I'm going to keep saying that when I stand up here, and also the other 254 folks that run elections in Texas. So I'm probably going to be the devil's advocate here for a minute, because we do have a lot of members that are offline counties. And they are offline counties because, as Christina explained earlier, when the team system came out, there were some things missing in the system. There were some lapses during busy elections and things like that that caused people to go and find offline vendors. And while they have made tremendous strides, and I just recently converted over to the team system, there are still, under the current system, some things that aren't provided in the system that I think, as Representative Dayala said, shows some lacking confidence from some of our election officials about getting on the team system. But I think everybody is looking forward to what's coming, the new generation of team, and the extra things that we might be able to see in that program that will help more efficiently run elections. And we've heard that there's no cost, and while that's true with the team system, there are some supplemental systems that counties are having to use to help with things such as ballot storage, image storage, and mail ballot things, and things that we have to do statutorily for those functions. And I think that there is a cost associated there with those things. But I do know that that is going to be fixed in the upcoming version that we have coming along. Beyond that, yes, I was a Votech county. I was one of those counties that when I received that letter, just on a principle matter, said, I'm not paying it, and immediately called the Secretary of State's office. I had been talking with Christie over there for some time to convert to the system and was waiting for the new system, but decided to go ahead and speed that up. And so I applaud the Secretary of State's office. They really jumped, as they always do, to make sure that we had some place to go. They started making really good changes to the system that I know they weren't planning to make this presidential election year, as none of us were. So we made that conversion. They made it as easy as possible. We haven't used it in an election yet, but we're doing a lot of testing and going through things. But we did have to acquire another vendor to hold our images. And also, a lot of counties realized that because a lot of our vendors have gone to the cloud, we're having to do contingency planning for those images, as in getting them and backing them up locally. So we've been going through that. And I mean, I don't think I have anything different to say other than what you've already heard, but some of our counties do value the right to have offline. And so I wanted to make sure that we knew why they were making those decisions. And Representative Morales, I would love to give my information to Valverde and Maverick County so that they can contact us for best practices.
Awesome, yes.
So are there any, are you finished? I'm sorry.
I'm finished.
Are there any issues that would not be addressed in the upcoming team system as you understand it, that you would need?
So I don't have a well-rounded idea of what's coming. What I do know is that the system will have a baseline, and then we can, as counties, enhance that, if I understand it correctly.
Okay.
So we can add on to those what we call election management modules.
Have you had the opportunity to have any conversations with Ms. Atkins or the Secretary of State's office about making sure that y'all are all on the same page about what you need this system to do?
Absolutely. We collaborate with them daily. We talk to them all the time. And I think actually these audits, which our association loves, I think it gives us insight into the things that we can do better and train on, have given us a lot of insight into what we would like to see moving forward.
Wonderful. All right. Members, any other questions?
I want to make clear, you're saying when you transitioned, you did have to incur there were some associated costs with respect to the transition to the teams?
There were for us, and I don't know how other counties are handling it because we're new on it, but we have a data storage software that we had to purchase, and then whereas in our offline, we had the whole election management package. Now we don't, so we have an election management, which is polling location and poll worker management, and then a data storage. But the new system, from what I understand, won't require us to have all that.
And so when you did transition, what were the approximate costs that your county incurred in that transition with these other supplements that you had to obtain?
I would probably say it was a little over $30,000.
And do you know when the new system is being planned for these upgrades, so that now it seems like it's going to have all the bells and whistles?
So my understanding is it will be in 2025 when they will move to the new Team 2.0. And I don't know how much of this will be in that baseline offered by the state, but I do know, and I always like the ability to expand on that with the same system.
And thank you for sharing the best practices. Are you leaving right after so we can share our contact information?
I can
or-
give you my card.
Okay, perfect.
I'll make sure you get it before we
Thank you.
leave.
Appreciate it.
So you may have heard my question earlier about any contractual hurdles. If the state were to mandate that these 33 counties come in the state system, are you aware of any contractual hurdles that would prevent?
I can tell you, as we heard from Representative Morales, we were with VOTEC since, I think it was like 2014, and it was a 30-day out for VOTEC. So
was your
I'm not sure of other vendors, but
Okay, all right. And as far as you're aware, there are not any other contractual hurdles?
not that I'm aware of, but I think we can do the research to find out what those contracts look like.
Yeah, if you would.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
absolutely.
All right, members, any other questions? Don't go too far. We're going to call you up and a couple of witnesses, but we're going to
Perfect.
go on
I'll be here.
to, thank you so much for your time. We're going to go on and talk about some other Texas counties and potential emergent issues. Is that what we're doing next? Yeah. So the chair's going to call Christina Atkins back. Thank you, Ms. Atkins, for being here today. You are Christina Atkins. You're here on behalf of the Texas Secretary of State's office, and you are testifying in a neutral position. Is that all correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
All right, go right ahead.
We've had a number of conversations, I've had a number of conversations with members on the committee about concerns that we've seen over the course of the last year with Texas elections. A couple of points that we may want to bring to the committee's attention that might be helpful for consideration for future elections and potential future legislation. I made reference to this earlier in my testimony with respect to the audits, that in Texas, this year alone, we have seen a number of issues that have impacted the day-to-day operations of elections in Texas. We have had tornadoes, we have had wildfires, we have had catastrophic flooding, we've had active shooter situations, bomb threats, telecommunication failures. All of it has happened, of course, during the election process itself. Some of our counties have been more impacted than others, and that a lot of that has to do with the geography that they have. I know one of the individuals that's here that I believe is testifying is from Liberty County, and they can speak to you about some of the challenges that they have faced because of weather-related issues. From an emergency management standpoint, a lot of our counties, I think, share great concern going into the November election about preparedness from some issues in this particular area. And making sure that they're able to maintain their operations and that they have the right support from their county and the right resources to make sure that they can handle any of these issues that may come up during the election process itself. Beyond that, there are some other concerns that I think are important to note for the committee that have been expressed to us by counties. We have done a good job in the state excuse me, we have done a good job in the state, and I think preparing our counties and providing necessary training when it comes to cybersecurity. One of the areas where we've been playing a little bit of catch-up is with respect to physical security. We have been fortunate in Texas in that most of these issues haven't impacted Texas yet, but we are seeing an uptick in threats and threatening behavior towards election officials. This is impacting people in their personal lives with information being posted online, names and addresses of election workers being posted online. We've had some impact, election officials here in Texas that have been personally impacted in this area in that their information was posted online and folks were directed to go to their house, presumably for potentially threatening reasons. This is one area of law where we don't have a lot of confidentiality protections in place for our election officials. I worry about that even with my own team. As my team has expanded and we have more and more people working on elections at the state level, I do worry about that as there's a lot of visibility into the state office, making sure that we can protect our personnel so that they feel safe enough to take these jobs. And so that's one of those issues that is becoming a more persistent issue. I hope in Texas that we don't experience what other states are experiencing, but this is something that warrants some discussion and warrants some time and attention. Perhaps there's some policy issues there that may be able to address those. Another area that I think is important to address is transparency of election records. In our last hearing, we spoke a little bit about some of the ballot secrecy issues that are of concern in Texas right now. There's another level of transparency that I think is important to look at too, and that is looking at the results and the reporting of information, who votes in an election versus what those outcomes are in an election. And while we've spoken about some of the voter privacy issues, the transparency of these results and the insight that they give us into election data has also helped us identify some interesting trends that we've seen in some counties. We had a county in the primary election that when we were working on validating returns from that county, making sure that their Canvas data was correct, we noticed that overall in the county, the total number of voters that were voting in that county was around the 5,000 mark. But when we were comparing that to the Canvas results, we noticed, for example, in the presidential race, that there were only 1,800 votes cast in that presidential race. And that discrepancy was so large that we contacted the county out of concern that there may be data discrepancies there. And there were not data discrepancies. The county actually provided reports from their voting system validating that 3,000 people in that election chose to undervote the presidential race. And that can largely be attributed to hotly contested local elections and potentially the use of maybe campaigns guiding candidates or supplying assistance to candidates to direct them to vote only in those contested races rather than on the full ballot. And so I think looking at some of those data discrepancies has identified, for us at the state, it identified a potential issue in a county that could be an indication of bigger problems or problems with the campaigns or problems with potentially improper behavior.
Sorry, that drew my attention.
Yes, sir.
That was a presidential election?
Yes, sir. It was in
And undervoted out of 5,000?
There were 5,000 votes that were cast in that primary election, that particular party's primary election, and 3,000 people undervoted the presidential race.
That didn't happen. You're saying it did happen?
It did happen.
And after looking into it, it still did happen?
Yes, sir. That's exactly, people were coming in, there were 2 local races, and they were coming in and only voting on that local race. And anecdotally, we heard reports that there was a lot of voter assistants that were used in that election, and a lot of active campaigning where individuals were directing folks just to vote for those hotly contested races. Those are the only ones that they were tracking, I think, outside in the campaign community. And so that was, I think, leading to voters not voting in some of the more high-profile national races.
Surprising.
What county was that?
That was in Starr County.
Members, any other questions?
I just want to make clear. you found this anomaly, and I guess the system did the right thing, right? And pinging it, and then you following up with the county. But there is absolutely nothing wrong with respect to voter turnout and an undercount in one specific, especially a national race.
That's correct. That's
So-
correct. There's nothing legally wrong with that. You can undervote any race that you would want. You are not required to vote every race on
Or
the ballot.
local candidates that are trying to get their voters to go
Correct.
vote. But they don't want to also then draw the ire of some of them that would otherwise, let's say, vote for you, but then if you start recommending who they think they should vote for in the presidential race,
Yes, sir.
so then you're like, look, just go vote in my race.
Yes, sir. And what
or-
I
or
would
in
add
that
on
race.
to that is that discussion we had in our last committee hearing about ballot privacy and making sure that individuals can vote a secret ballot is very, very important. Because I think this situation that happened there, where there is a local race that's drawing a lot of attention and potentially bringing in voters that may not traditionally vote in that party's primary, if they want to cast ballots for other races, but they're concerned that somebody could locate their ballot through process of elimination, that could impact what they're comfortable, how they're comfortable voting in that election, and it could impact how they select their candidates. So I think these data issues where we see unexpected anomalies highlight the importance of making sure that we tighten up the laws with respect to ballot privacy and voter privacy.
Okay, before I move on to the next set of questions, do you know, in the scenario that you gave from Stark County and the undercount, do you know about what primary it was?
It was the Democratic primary. And it was something that our office, we actually worked with the Texas Democratic Party on that. They reached out to us. They were actually the ones that identified the anomaly first and had some concerns because they were performing the statutorily
Yes.
required canvass.
Who reached out to the Secretary of State?
The Democratic Party.
Oh, they themselves, got it, okay. All right. You mentioned certain threats also with respect to, some of the things that, policy issues that this committee could consider being made to elections officials, and that we don't have a robust statutory system in place to make sure that we have the adequate protections in there. Do you know, was there a consensus as to where these threats were coming from? Or what was urging these threats
For the
then to certain
individuals-
elected officials?
For the
Yeah.
individuals that I've heard about here in Texas that have faced challenges in this area, a lot of times it's just virtue of their position. When people are unhappy with outcomes in an election, the first thing that folks do is they attack the process. And so our named election officials, our elected county clerks, actually already have some confidentiality protections under Texas law, but our appointed elections administrators and their personnel in their office do not have those same protections. So we have a population of our election community in Texas that has a lot more exposure, where their address, their personal information through public records requests can get out there more easily than some of our elected officials.
So either some candidate or some person going out there
Mm-hmm.
and claiming that our elections are rigged,
Yes, sir.
that's what's causing some of our elections administrators and our staff to then receive some of these threats, because then people may perceive that that is a true statement, even though previously, even today, earlier, your testimony is we have a robust and a great redundancy system, and we have great voter rolls, and there are no or very minimal issues, but there is voter integrity in the state of Texas.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hankins, do you have a recommendation on ballot secrecy specifically to keep, by process of elimination, a person's vote, an individual's vote, from becoming public? Do you have a recommendation on how to make sure that that sort of process doesn't happen or that sort of outcome doesn't happen?
Yes, sir. As we discussed previously, for our upcoming presidential election, we have protections under our public information laws that our counties have been relying on. They have been actively seeking opinions from the Attorney General's office to give them the ability to redact certain information, and the Attorney General's office has been responding and providing the authorization for those redactions. But beyond that, from a policy perspective, there are a couple of things that we may want to consider doing that would eliminate the need for redacting so much information. First, our precincts in Texas are very small compared to other states, and we have very strict rules on how we draw precincts in Texas. And so we may want to rethink the necessity of some of those rules. We don't need to have such specific rules, and compared to other states, other states do not have those. Additionally, you will sometimes have small elections, low turnout elections, where it's inevitable that the numbers you may be able to discern an individual's vote just because of the nature of the election and the turnout. The way other states handle this is they aggregate results, or they don't release precinct level reporting. And that's done from a protection standpoint to protect those individual results. So if we change the way we draw precincts so that they're not so small, so we have more people in that defined territory with different ballot styles, it would be harder to identify a specific individual's ballot. And then if we protect the voter on the other end by making sure that we, in situations where that's inevitable, that we're going to have low numbers, that we can report that information differently.
So redacting is a Band-Aid. It's kind of a temporary fix, but a more permanent, robust fix would be, if I hear you correctly, make sure that we allow our precincts to be larger
Yes, sir.
and/or don't release at precinct level specificity. What's the either unintended consequence or negative to that?
So I think with the precinct level reporting, the folks that were going to be the most upset about changing the way we draw our precincts or limiting what we report there are going to be the data analysts. A lot of the folks that work for campaigns, where they like to be able to identify patterns and see where voters are coming from. They may lose a level of granularity there, but I do think that the precinct, they're not going to lose all granularity. There are ways to do this that still allow individuals to know and understand where their voters come from, but to do it in a way that's more protective of voter privacy.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So, on this ballot secrecy issue, I believe it was since the last hearing we had, the Secretary of State's office, just to remind everyone, has issued instruction or a directive to all the counties on what they can do to implement. We've referred to it as a Band-Aid, but we think it's a fix until we can get to the legislative session. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Our office has issued two different types of guidance. The first one was addressing the public information component and the necessity for potential redactions. The second action that we took, and it was actually after this committee last met, we issued an additional advisory regarding the numbering of ballots. We discussed in the last hearing that there's litigation where an individual is alleging to have an algorithm of some sort that can trace a ballot back to a voter through that ballot number. I still don't know what's in that litigation, but in reviewing records and looking at kind of the landscape, we made the decision that we can't take the risk that there might be something in there that could compromise ballot secrecy. So we did issue guidance where we modified our electronic poll book standards to make sure that ballot numbering can't be generated from an electronic poll book. And the reason why that's relevant is electronic poll books contain voter names in there. So we want to completely divorce that process. That did impact a large number of counties in Texas. It impacted 3 different e-poll book vendors, but a lot of counties now that are going to have to do pre-printed numbers on blank ballots to meet the ballot numbering requirements. Texas is unique. We're almost the only state that has a ballot numbering requirement like we have in Texas, and so that gives us it poses some additional challenges for us because of this numbering requirement.
And do we have any indication as to whether or not the counties are going to comply with the directive?
Yes, it does appear to me that the counties are definitely complying with this directive. I think for our election officials out there, even though this has increased some of their election costs, they don't want people to not feel safe voting. They want people to have confidence in elections and have the ability to vote their ballot and keep those selections private. So we have not had any pushback from counties on this.
Okay. Does your office have plans to continue to follow up on the directive and ensure that it's being complied with?
Yes, sir, and we've been talking, those counties that were impacted, many of them reached out to us directly to talk about what options they have in front of them. So we have been working with many of them pretty regularly and discussing their options to make sure that they're able to do what they need to do to be in compliance with the law.
All right. Now, since the last hearing, I believe, going on to another issue,
Yes, sir.
we've had a change in the EA's office in Bear County. Is that correct? Or did that happen before the last hearing? I can't remember.
Yes, sir. Since the last hearing that we had, there was an announcement made in Bear County. The current elections administrator in Bear County has tendered her resignation. She is staying on through the presidential election because it would be difficult to find somebody that has that kind of experience and can take on that challenge of an election that large in a county that big. The news articles that were published do indicate that she has indicated that she will be leaving after that election, and the county is searching for a replacement elections administrator.
Okay. So is we talked about how Harris County has been voluntarily interacting and interfacing with you guys, ostensibly trying to make their election process better than it's been in recent history. Are you getting any cooperation at all out of Bear County? Because I know there's been some issues.
Yes, sir. I mean, I think there's been some documented issues. There have been concerns from both political parties about some decisions and process and procedure in Bear County, and that's been publicized quite a bit. I would say that we work with all of our counties. We talk to them on a day-to-day basis with respect to utilizing our team system and data. I don't think I communicate quite as much with Bear County as we do with Harris County, for example, on their internal process and procedure on how they run elections. I definitely know a lot more about Harris County.
Okay, all right. If SB 1933 or SB 1750 were to be expanded to include smaller counties, would the Secretary of State's office would there be some restriction, or would there be some needs that the Secretary of State's office would have to be able to comply with the statute?
If 1933, which is what gives us the ability to place a county under oversight, administrative oversight, were expanded, I think that there are a handful of counties out there that I think might be in a position where oversight may be necessary. And a lot of that, if you all recall, a lot of those oversight provisions are triggered based on complaints that we receive in our office. And we definitely have counties where we routinely get complaints on similar issues. And some of the counties that we've mentioned today. And so I do think that we would have to look at that and evaluate. Of course, we don't want to prejudge anything, and we always want to make sure that we're evaluating it in terms of the current complaints that are submitted. But I do think that there may be, counties where a little bit of additional help could be beneficial to them. With Senate Bill 1933, we did receive some resources to help us with implementation of any kind of monitoring and oversight programs. If there was a desire for our office to have oversight in a lot of counties or multiple counties, there may be some personnel limitations that we have. That may be something to consider.
Okay. All right. What counties at this point would benefit?
So we have a handful of counties where we tend to receive complaints persistently, or there's been litigation in counties that have identified some potential issues. We discussed the data discrepancies in Starr County. They are a county that we have had to work with by court order. They've had to work with our office because of noncompliance with certain list maintenance requirements. And so some of these counties were like that, where there have been persistent issues and even litigation stepping in to mandate certain cooperation with our office, those are some of the counties that I imagine would be some of the counties that we'd have to look at. And it's hard for me to give you a whole lot more specifics without looking at kind of our complaints, but I will say that we have seen patterns in counties like that.
Would you mind looking at those complaints and maybe getting with me?
Yes,
on-
sir.
On what those counties are?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And I will add that when we make criminal referrals on criminal complaints, that also limits our ability to talk publicly about some of these issues. And so if something's been referred on to the Attorney General's office. So there may be a few other situations that we have some knowledge of that we just can't discuss at the moment.
I understand. Okay. All right. Members, any other questions?
I do.
Yes, sir.
With respect to the complaints that the Secretary of State receives, is there a process in place is the Secretary of State's office mandated to keep statistical data on these complaints as they come in? Is there? I
So
guess that's
we
the
do
first
have a
question.
process in place. In fact, with the additional personnel that we received from the legislature this last year, we actually created an entirely new team to manage our public information and complaints. So we do have a process in place for receiving, reviewing, and making recommendations on complaints. And there is some data that we can pull from looking at complaints that have been filed.
Okay. And then my second part of that question would be, if you are now compiling data and in statistical format, is that something that is generally right now available to the public on your website, where we could see it in charts, graphs, very easily, rather than just like listing down all the
Sure.
complaints, let's say for 2023 or 2024? I'd like to see how
Sure. I understand what you're
how
asking.
it compares to the other counties
No,
across
we
the
don't
state.
currently have data like that on our website. We haven't delved too much in the data analysis on our complaint area. Our folks that do a lot of data analysis have been tied up with some audits. But I think we're hoping, we've just brought on a few new individuals to our office, some folks that have a data analysis background, like a numbers data analysis background. And so we're hoping to be able to do more, to be able to help identify some trends and publicize that. So I would say that's something that folks can look out for in the next couple of months, to see more data and data analysis like that, specifically on complaints on our website.
Yeah. That's what I think, just the general public, and even, I guess, the Texas House members and the legislature as a whole, I'd really like to be able to see if we can discern that information to a more granular level and be able to see charts, just to see if there's just
Yes, sir.
like peaks or something that's just way off, a particular county receiving, let's say, 100 complaints to, say, a similar sized county
Yes, sir.
receiving one complaint. Well, then obviously then we need to figure out what's going on with that particular county.
Yes, sir. The one distinction I would make is our general complaint process, anybody can submit a complaint there. When we're talking what the statute says on administrative oversight, it's a defined list of individuals that can submit a complaint that would trigger administrative oversight. So that's definitely a more restrictive category. But I think, that's definitely something we can look at with respect to our broader complaints, if there's any others there that would fall into that more narrow category too.
And do you have enough statutory, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for, breadth in place for your office and your team to be able to do what I guess I'm asking for
Yes,
in the
sir.
form of charts and graphs, or do we need some legislative mandate for that?
I think for the kind of data that you're looking for, some of these trends, there's no statutory mandate that we produce it, but it is, as I said, these are some things that we're looking to do on our own to help us better understand our data.
And you believe that you can already with the state guidelines that are in place with the Secretary of State, that you can go and compile this information, and that no one would stop you from
The limit-
providing these graphs and charts?
The limitations that we have on data that we could produce with respect to complaints is that if a complaint is pending, it's confidential. If I refer a complaint to the Attorney General's office, it's confidential until a disposition has been made on their end. So I think there are categories there, those that identify potential criminal conduct, that we may not be able to publish data on because of the restrictions under current law to keep that information confidential. So we might be able to say we've had, X number of referrals, but I couldn't go down and give you a breakdown of by county, you know, what the referral was about. That might be too granular. I have to talk to my general counsel about that.
I'd like to have an answer on that, because I think maybe the specifics, and especially if you're referring, I can understand, especially for a criminal referral.
Yes, sir.
Having the specifics as far as the individual complainant, who they were complaining against, what the issue was, maybe that's something that should be until it's resolved criminally. But I think that we as a whole, and Texans as a whole, should be able to rely on whether that particular county has one complaint, let's say, in the
Sure.
last year, or whether there were 1,000 complaints.
Sure. I would say if you look at our audit reports, we have a section on complaints in all of our audit reports where we looked at those trends. And maybe that's something that we can look at doing for counties outside of just the audit, you know, making some of that data available to the public.
Got it. And when you do visit with the general counsel, I would really like that follow-up.
Yes, sir.
Because if we need to do something, if they feel like they have some concerns and legislatively we need to do something to address that, so that you can then just generally provide some information, so we can at least know whether there was one complaint for that county or thousands
sir.
of them. I'd like to be able to have that data, and more importantly, have that data to where it's readily available to the general Texas public, so that they can, again, feel comfortable about somebody's listening to them at the state level, and it is being at least taken in and addressed.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Higgins. The chair calls Heather Hawthorne. Thank you for hanging in here with us, Ms. Hawthorne.
Absolutely.
You're Heather Hawthorne. You are the Chambers County Clerk. You're here on behalf of the Chambers County's Clerk's Office and the County and District Clerks Association of Texas. Is that all correct?
Yes, sir.
And you're neutral.
And I am neutral.
So neutral, yes. All right, well, thank you. Go right ahead.
So I'd like to start by maybe saying that some of our top priorities that I think as a state we need to look at, or maybe I need to give a little update on for y'all's information, is that we have really delved into, as an association, as a group, of the self-audit. And the mandate of the risk-limiting audit, which will be coming up in 2026, we have been actively, as a state, working on training for that audit process. It was a brand-new thing to all of us. It's not complicated. It takes a lot of manpower, so to speak, but we have been holding regional trainings, or not we, the Secretary of State's office has been holding regional trainings throughout the state over the last, say, 4 weeks, and that's the top priority. So I held the regional training for the Houston, Galveston, Brazoria, Fort Bend, Chambers, Jefferson, Liberty, et cetera, 2 weeks ago, and we went through that RLA process. So I did want you to know that we're already training and preparing for the 2026 mandate. That audit, along with our partial manual counts that we do for every election, we hope that will also give the voter some ease, or some that we are fair and transparent, and the outcome is the outcome, whether you like the outcome or not. Years ago, we used to just throw everything in a box when the election was over, high-five each other, walk out of the courthouse at midnight, and, move on to the next one. So now, preparing for not only your random chance of being drawn for the election, but that the public can feel better about any kind of an audit. Now we are also training election officials around the state to organize after the election like you will be audited the next day. So when we are packing things up and preserving them, that it will be in order. We've learned a great deal from the counties that have gone through the audit process. So I think we're going to see great things come in the next audit session, and every audit after, is because we're learning how to do it. Some other areas of interest that are prioritized is misinformation. I live in Chambers County. This is going all over Facebook. I don't know if anybody's seen it. It's a map of It's a map of two hurricanes that are going to enter in the Gulf. And of course, when you first look at it, and it's like, oh, first alert, Channel 12, trouble in the Gulf. This is a map from 2020. And so we really, and this was on my Facebook, and several other people have already sent it and shared it, et cetera. So it's a real concern, obviously, for the November election, misinformation. So we're trying and working with elections officials all over the state on what you should do to prepare for misinformation. When the Harris County episode happened of running out of paper, Chambers County borders Harris County, and somebody posted on their Facebook page, and it went kind of viral for a few minutes on that Chambers County has run out of paper. And of course, I responded immediately, fake news, you know. Happiness is Harris County in your rearview mirror. I'm kidding, I'm kidding. So anyway, we're working on that as well as working about misinformation. Training. I'm a former school teacher. I believe in it, but we need more funding for it. We have to train our election judges better. You heard that through the audit. You heard that through the paperwork process. Guadalupe County doing a great job on training, holding a separate training for the judges just on the paperwork. I'm doing that this year for the first time, October 10th. Best practice. That paperwork has gotten to be something else, but it tells the story. And so we need these people that only come to work for us once or twice a year. Most of them are retired, and most of them are like, oh, yeah, I think I remember that. We even have instances in my own county where they think they're saving you a piece of paper that you can use in the next election, so they leave it blank. And, you know, they're just trying to be good stewards of the taxpayer money, and I'm telling them, no, I need a 0 with a signature, not applicable, something on that piece of paper. So training. We've also found out that law enforcement has no training in election law in the academy. Obviously, they have bigger fish to fry. We would like to see some form of having election hours with the TCOL so that they get TCOL credit for attending election law enforcement training. Christina and I spoke at the Texas Sheriff's Conference this summer, and it was amazing that how many sheriffs, you know, have no idea, like, what to do in case of this. To answer your question, Representative Morales, the number one complaint is electioneering. Somebody's crossed the line, you know, they're 6 inches over the line and they need to be thrown out and sent to prison. So, but when law enforcement shows up, they don't know, you know, who's in charge, what the actual law is. So our goal is to create a robust program and hopefully, like I said, work with TCOL so that those officers get some training hours as well, because I feel like they won't really show up unless we offer that carrot. And then back on complaints also is we need to make sure they're legitimate complaints. Again, misinformation is widespread, and we want to make sure that those complaints are legitimate. Privacy issue on the ballot happened in Chambers County for the first time. I kind of freaked a little bit because it was very obvious to see who voted and how they voted. We had 25 mail ballots, 15 in-person voting during the Democratic runoff this year, the primary runoff, and 6 election day votes, and those were basically the election judges because they hadn't had any turnout, so they went ahead and voted so that they would at least have a vote. And so it's very obvious that there needs to be legislation to change that. Long-haul truck drivers had that call again. It comes up every year, especially during the presidential, that these people are living in your county, they don't qualify for a mail ballot at being 65 and older, et cetera, but they're not going to be in the county during early voting or election day. How can you help me? And I'm saying, well, we have to send it to an out-of-county address. And they're like, well, I don't know where I'm going to be. I long haul between San Francisco and Chicago on US 80. And I'm like, I don't know where to send your ballot. And so we have to figure out, as Texans together, how we can help these people vote. There's got to be a way. Overnighting it to a hotel, and they don't make that hotel. This gentleman told me he lives in his truck when he travels. That wasn't going to help. So that's just another ongoing issue that for the last 18 years, that every year I think and shake my head, we have got to fix this problem for these Texans. If you can vote as an astronaut, you ought to be able to vote as a long-haul truck driver. And finally, let me see if I've hit all my, okay, so my major priority is we have extended election hours so that it's standardized in this state. And let me back up. Last session, 2 sessions ago, we passed a bill that if you did not have an opponent, you could be declared elected on the ballot. I called it the ego bill because every candidate wants to see how many votes they get. We repealed that this past session and went back to putting, even if you're unopposed, you're on the ballot. House Bill 1217, it was a good idea. It's not working, just like the ego bill didn't work. Standardizing hours in small populated counties and having 12 hours of every day of early voting and not gonna work. It's just costly, 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 and we have numbers to show it. That money could be gone to use for paper that's very expensive in these voting machines. But we're paying these judges and clerks to sit there for hours with no voters. So I'd like to see us help our friends around Texas and their county budgets that just get tighter and tighter and tighter, do away with this mandatory voting hours. Other than that, one other thing, it's getting harder and harder to find election workers. It's a lot of responsibility for very low pay. I believe in the primary, we pay $12 an hour. You can go to say, welcome to Buc-ee's and make more. So we just need to consider that the responsibilities that we're asking of these individuals, that they're compensated correctly for it. And that's all I have.
Questions?
So
You're out of practice.
my colleague, John Busey reminds me, he's a vice chair of this committee, but he's unable to attend here, but he's telling me when you were mentioning those that travel out of the county, that he has a bill that would allow those that are out of the county to receive their ballots electronically. They could then print them and be able to vote them and then be able to mail them back in. Are you familiar with his legislation?
I'm not, but that's exactly what we afford our military members to do, or our FPCA voters to do.
So this is already something
It's
that is-
already something that we use as a practice as far as we email them the ballot. They print it because they don't know where they're gonna be. They may be on a ship, wherever, it doesn't matter. And they print it, vote it, it comes back. you lose a little bit of your privacy. Not that we don't match the name, but while it's got to then be transposed onto a ballot, because the ballot paper that they're printing is just Xerox copy paper. So when we get it back in, it has to be transposed onto ballot paper that can be scanned.
Got it.
But we don't put the names, or once the envelopes, don't match, but there is that little, process of having to put it onto a real ballot. Totally agree that these people, that is a definite way that will serve that.
Great.
Yep.
I'll visit with him some more, so that maybe we can see if we can push forward that legislation and see if we can have it. I mean, obviously, we don't want everybody now to start doing that, right? So we have
No,
to have the right parameters in place.
Correct. And we have had so many different people that, through the years I've watched that, and not picking on any one group, but emergency room physicians, they don't know when they're going to be, and it just, the list continues to grow and grow. These people are, their employment takes them out. And so they need that parameter. There has to be parameters, as you said. We don't want to just include everybody.
Yeah. Well, I can see this helping a lot. Like, for example, in my district, there's all these laborers out there in the oil and gas industry, and they may be out at a ranch that's 50 miles in from the road, and they may be there for the next week or 2 weeks. They really don't know before they have to come back. So they may miss all of the early vote, and when they do come, let's say on a Saturday and a Sunday, and I have many friends and relatives, I mean, all they want to do is rest, and there may not be any time for them to vote on when they get, back home late Saturday afternoon, things like that. So, yeah, we can definitely. Now, let me ask you this. You described a process by which that ballot is then received. Right now, it's happening with the military, and your staff is actually then opening up the envelopes and then transposing that, the way that they voted, onto an actual ballot that can be read, scanned.
Not my staff, the early voting ballot board. So which is a whole different group of people.
Good.
Yes.
Okay.
So no one in our offices statewide touched that. That goes to the early voting ballot board, which then they take that ballot, and then they process that, and then it goes to the central count team that then scan those ballots for tabulation.
And are you familiar whether that system in place has at least, what's the checks and balances there for that person that's actually bubbling in?
Good question.
Yeah.
Three people must participate. One calls, one bubbles, one watches.
Beautiful. I was not aware of that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. You guys know what you're doing.
We do. We do. It's the
Thank you.
media that sometimes makes it like we don't.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Are you satisfied that the directive from the, I'm going to put you on the spot here.
It's all right.
Are you, yeah, I know she can. Are you satisfied that the directives from the Secretary of State's office with regard to the ballot secrecy issue are going to be effective for this upcoming election?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. And it's totally a Band-Aid, and until we can get to January, yes, sir. Very confident.
And are you
And I
confident?
will tell you this, and this is not from firsthand experience, but from my colleagues, that those have requested an Attorney General's opinion, they have been expediting those opinions, which is wonderful.
Good.
Yes.
Good. All right. Members, any other questions? Thank you so much.
And Chairman Smith, thank you.
Yes,
I have felt in this past session with your leadership such a comfort and ease coming to this committee and being able to work together and having people on the committee that are realistic in what's going on in Texas. And I really appreciate what you've done for us.
Well, it's been a pleasure. and
I
I've
will
just
miss
gotta-
you.
Well, I'm going to miss you, and I'll be around.
I know.
But you, when you're given this kind of committee, I'll just, as an aside here, it's easy. And then you have wonderful professionals like you all, so thank you.
Well, thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Yeah.
Can I say, I just want to make sure, don't give him all the credit, because he didn't get to pick. I'm kidding. I swear, I have enjoyed working with Reggie also, and especially in these times that we are in and the issues with all of this misinformation going out there, to have a chairman like this that can direct us and can lead us in the right way and make sure that we're talking about what should be done in Texas and the right thing that should be done, regardless of what party affiliation we have. We couldn't have asked for a better chairman. I thank the speaker for appointing him, and I think that we really were the lucky ones in having a chairman like Chairman
I
Smith.
agree, 100%.
Hold on,
Thank
I'm
you.
gonna pile on.
All right. I feel like I'm at Commissioner's Court.
Being the newest one on this committee, I feel sorry for all the other chairmen or whatever committees I serve on in the future, because I don't know how they're gonna measure up to this guy. So
you guys.
anyways, thank you, Reggie.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
very much. Oh, goodness. Thank you. Thank you very much. Does the clerk feel the same way?
Yes,
Okay, all right, good. You better, yeah. Well, thank you, thank you. Jennifer Dornoff. Thank you.
I was gonna get my invite to the party.
Yes, thank you for hanging in there with us. You're Jennifer Dornoff. You are the Hays County Election Administrator. You're here on behalf of them and the Texas Association of Election Administrators who.
County election officials.
Yes, county election officials, okay. And you're neutral in your testimony here today, and that's all correct, right?
All correct.
All right, go right ahead.
So emerging issues in elections, boy, this is what keeps us up at night, especially before a big election. And I didn't know really where to cut this off because I wrote a lot of things down, a lot of which Heather said. But one thing that I think is important that she did say was more law enforcement training, because the last thing that we want to happen is to have a peace officer roll up to a polling location and give wrong information. And that happened in our county, and it's happened in other counties. We want people to have confidence in their law enforcement. And the fact of the matter is, they've had a lot placed on them, and they have no training hours for this. And so we do think that's something very important. There was actually a video last week in Tarrant County, I think it was, where a law enforcement officer was giving wrong information on election law. And there are some gray areas that are difficult. And in this particular instance, it was the difference between how far out from a polling location or a polling station that you can use a cell phone. And that is probably one of the biggest complaints we get in every single election. And there's a part in the law where electioneering and loitering is 100 feet from the building, the door, the entry. And then the cell phone was 100 foot from the polling station, which can cause problems if you're in a civic center or something like that, where 100 feet could be inside, but then you can apply other laws. But anyway, you can see where I'm going with this, and that's very confusing for law enforcement,
Real
so.
quick on this.
Yes, sir.
Uh-huh.
Is 50% of the battle for the peace officer to know who's in charge? I mean, in
I
my
think
mind,
that
I'm
is-
thinking as long as, you know, who's in charge here, because I don't know, I don't understand as a peace officer how these things are run and who's in charge.
Right.
And I think once if you start out with that being known to the peace officer, that seems like that's half the battle. Is that fair?
And that could be the case, and I don't know the situation. I can tell you, most counties that I talk to do meet with their peace officer, all their agencies, law enforcement agencies, and do give them polling locations. I'm not sure if they give them the judges, but that's good, and we'll take that back and make sure that they're doing that. I think too, though, the fact that judges have this authority under the law that a lot of people don't realize is probably part of that. The second thing is, we've talked a little bit about 1217 and how it's not one size fits all, and how it's really been cumbersome on a lot of smaller counties to keep up with the staffing and have the finances to do the extra hours. And really, there was not a lot of turnout during that time. So I hear that we have some fixes on the horizon for that. Thank you for your thinking forward to that. SB 924, same difficulties. We found that a lot of small or larger locations couldn't comply with the law. because we're having a hard time finding people who want to host elections. They don't like the signs, they don't like the electioneering, they don't like if they're churches, they don't like that it's through Sunday. There's just so many different reasons why we cannot find locations. So that was another one that was really difficult, and I know that you guys have thought about fixing that upcoming as well, so thank you for that. Emergency preparedness, something we're all focused on right now, and that's what I want to talk to Zapata, Maverick, Valverde counties about as well, because we've been planning on that. We've been planning on, where can we keep polling continuing if we have some big power outage? How could we do it? What locations have generators? Things like that. And that's something that we're actually speaking next week on, or later this week on. So we've been working in a collaboration with our emergency management departments, law enforcement agencies, the Secretary of State, working on making sure we prepare for those things. And we've been training a lot on that, so we're training that to other counties as well. Confidentiality, you heard a little bit about that. We don't get that as election administrators. Our staff don't get that. But more importantly, I've had people go to my poll workers' houses. I've had people reach out to them. They get through public information requests all of their data, go to their house, and I've had them represent themselves as Secretary of State. And I know it wasn't, because I know the Secretary of State doesn't do that. That troubles me, and that's why we have a hard time finding workers. So I would love to work on some bills to protect those people that work for us, that basically volunteer to do this work in a very difficult environment. This one may not be popular, but I'm throwing it out there. Returning to the 22-month retention on those physical ballots, not necessarily on the copies of ballots, but the physical ballots themselves. Because we are redacting, and we're committed to making sure that ballot privacy is upheld and that everybody's ballot is secret. But redacting the physical ballot is very difficult because we're basically having to make copies. So then, why don't we just do the electronic copies? And then we can make sure we're uniformly also redacting those ballots. So something to consider. It also takes a lot of staff to do the other. And then we talked about threats against election workers, voter challenges. We've gotten a lot of voter challenges lately. And I want to say this only to reiterate what Christina said earlier, and that our system is working. I myself got voter challenges in Hays County when we went through one by one to those voters. Most of them had already been canceled, already on suspense, and the system had already worked. And that was me as an offline county. So I'm online now. I expect that gets better, but it's working. It's working here, and we have a really robust system here in Texas. And I hear that a lot when I talk to people. They tell me, well, we do it right in Texas. It's all those other states. And I'm like, okay, well, thanks to y'all. I mean, we do it right because y'all brought some things to the forefront that we've been able to work on. And we will continue to work on with training, which is my final topic. Would love to see mandated training for election officials. Clerks have mandated training, but it's everything they do. It's not focused on elections. So we would like to see, and we have clerks in our association, so we would like to see mandated training hours for election officials. Other than that, I do want to take the time to thank you guys for the ballot by mail cleanup that you did in the last session. That's been wonderful, aligning those dates. Anything we do that can provide more consistency in our processes and dates, we think is helpful for everybody. I want to thank you for the trainers and the employees at the state. We have collaborated with them in so many different ways over the last 2 years, with training in our regional groups and just topics of training that will help us all through these audits. So that's all I have. I'm happy to answer questions.
Members, any questions? When you say election officials should have training, are you also including the volunteers?
Well, our volunteers do have training. I mean, and they could always have more training. I mean, I think most of us are going outside of what we regularly have to do for our judges. I know you heard about Guadalupe County. You heard that Heather's doing some extra form training. We did a mock election training, and this was totally unpaid. And these folks came to different commissioners' precincts and ran through real-time mock election, and we gave them scenarios, and they did it. I think a lot of us are doing different things like that. Of course, I don't know that we could ever give them enough training to know every single thing. But no, I'm talking about for those of us that run elections, mandatory continuing education hours.
Okay, all right. If no other questions, thank you
Thank you.
very much. The chair calls Lee Chambers.
Been sitting there for a while.
Ms. Chambers, thank you so much for hanging in there with us. My understanding is that, yeah, I've seen you, I think you've been here since we started. Thank you very much. My understanding is you are Lee Chambers, that you are the Liberty County Clerk, that you're testifying on behalf of the Liberty County Clerk's office, and that you're testifying in a neutral position. Is that all correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Go ahead.
I'm not really sure what areas you want to know about. We've had some unusual activity in Liberty County. I came into office in 2019. One of the first things I did, in fact, January of 2019, was I bought new election equipment for the county. We implemented the new election equipment. When I came in, my office had a lot of issues. Elections was one, but we had other issues. We had a lot of records conversion, court case conversions, things we needed to do. What I was beginning to realize is that elections, although it's about 1/5 of my duties, was taking up 80% of my time. So I looked into getting us an elections administrator, and we did that. We went through the procedures. We hired an elections administrator, and that person was in place for a good part of 2020, 2021, and part of 2022. That person was arrested and ultimately indicted for something non-related to the elections, although there are things that we could have in the election code that would have prohibited it. I can get into that more. And at the time that happened, the Commissioners Court voted to do away with the EA position, and elections came back to my office. One of the differences that happened, though, when it came back, and it's because of the way the code is written, the voter registration went back to the tax assessor. Prior to creating the EA, the voter registration had come to my office. And the reason for that is because the tax assessor had been in the courthouse, and we were all there in the same building. He moved away across town, and to keep the voter workers together, the voter registrar moved into my office area. And then that whole department moved over and became the elections administrator department. When it came back, the voter registrar went to the tax assessor, who again is all the way on another office way across town. The people that worked in his office had no experience with voter registration. And unlike the people in my office who had continuously worked with the EA and worked elections and stayed involved, that office had not. We've had some issues with that, getting them up to speed, getting them where they needed to go. It turns out the EA's office had some issues with voter registration as well. There was a lawsuit particularly in the 2022 election. But, I mean, we're doing everything we can to try to get all of that squared away. It's been a rough haul to get it back to where it needs to be. Getting the equipment where it needs to be, it was not maintained. In fact, some of the maintenance contracts were allowed to lapse. Some of the software that had been purchased to keep the database for the voter registrar and the mail-in ballots, the signatures, the images that we have to keep, those were let go. It was almost eerie when we got the office back. It was like something out of M. Night Shyamalan. You walked in and it's like people had just been sitting there eating and they're gone. And, you know, there's water running in the sink. It's like they just walked away, which they essentially did in protest of the Commissioners Court removing the EA position. Again, the EA was in jail at the time all this happened, but he had a very vocal following and a vocal group of people that worked for him, and they weren't happy with what happened. So we got back basically a shell of an office, and we've had to work very hard to build it back. The Secretary of State, we couldn't have done it without them. They came in there, they held our hand, they helped us get us where we need to be. We've been lucky enough to get the funding and everything that we need to get everything back to where it should be. I feel pretty good about this election, coming into this election. It's been a struggle, but we've got a lot of new people that will be working as election judges for the first time in this election. I think we're ready. I mean, we're doing everything we can to get ready, but it's been a struggle. It's been an interesting experience. We were also talking about the emergencies. We had one. We are a countywide voting system, and thank goodness we are, because in the May election we had flooding. Catastrophic flooding in our county. We had to close voting locations because they were literally underwater, and we did it the day before everyone was scheduled to vote. Luckily, a lot of those people were able to get out and vote at other locations. They were even setting up buses so people could get on buses and go somewhere else because the water, their homes were underwater. So most of the people were able to actually get out and vote, but that was something else. That was a scary situation. So we have more procedures in place for this upcoming November one, because obviously we're on the coast and we're worried about hurricanes and more potential flooding. We just went through Hurricane Beryl. That was fun. And so those kinds of issues are big for us. We've also had some issues where we're having to beef up our law enforcement, and we're doing that. It's a cost that we haven't had to address before. Putting on extra officers to watch polling locations is very expensive, but we're doing it. We're trying to find the money to do it. Voter security workers, security, I think we're pretty good with that. Our poll pads, we're just going to be careful about what we upload. In the area of misinformation, one of the things going around our county is that if there is writing on your ballot, it won't get counted. And they're talking about our initials and signatures that we put on the ballot. That is absolutely not true. But we're really preparing our judges to address that issue, because people are going to see a signature or, either a stamp, initials, or something on those ballots. And I anticipate people throwing a fit over that, but that doesn't mean they're not going to get counted. But that's the kind of misinformation that we deal with a lot. Like I said, I would like to see the EAs have the same oversight that the county clerks have with regard to purchasing. I think that would solve some of the problems we addressed, and there's no reason why they shouldn't. We have a board that sits and reviews the purchases I make. I think the EAs should have a similar situation. It could be the committee that hires and fires them that could do the review. However you want to do it. They're kind of the same people on both committees anyway. The only difference is the sheriff. But that overview definitely needs to be there. There's a lot of autonomy in that EA position that helped create the problems that we had in our county. Be careful of that. The other one is he was on some boards, not public election, but appointed boards by publicly elected officials. Housing Authority, Emergency Services District. This is where he got into trouble. I think that the restrictions in 31.035 should include appointments to government boards. I'd like to see you add that to some legislation. But those are my main issues. I would like to see the election workers get paid to attend training. That's a concern they complain to us a lot about. We try to make it up in other ways for them. We bring great food or try to make it on days when they can do it. We try to do some stuff online, Zoom meetings and all that. But, really and truly, they need to be there, and it's hard for them to take off on a Saturday afternoon, especially if they're not getting paid for it. So I'd like to see them get paid for the time they spend doing training, election judges, and election workers. Do y'all have any questions for me?
Well, let me just say thank you so much for taking the time to
Sure.
come up here. We extended the invitation, and you graciously came, and I appreciate your candor about the situation. It's very refreshing, and it's helpful. Remind me, when was the EA position removed in your county?
The EA position was removed last March in a vote before the Commissioners Court. So we got it back towards the end of March. There was a May election pending. That was something, that was a challenge. We have to wait 2 years before we can create another one. There's a lot of discussion as to whether we should or shouldn't. Luckily, one of the reasons why we created the EA position, because elections were solely within the county clerk's office. There wasn't a separate person who was doing elections. It was that we were doing that and everything else that we do. When we got the EA position back, one of the arrangements I made with the commissioners was that we keep the budget and the positions in place that they had put together for the EA position. So it is now a separate department within the county clerk's office. I have an elections director. There's staff that works just for the elections office. They're not having to come over and worry about, doing birth certificates or marriage licenses or any of that kind of thing. Going to court, they just handle elections. We have some roving interns that we hire that we will send over to elections when elections is heavy. When they're not doing that, they come back over and help us with filing and whatnot. So we've been able to make that work a lot better than it did before we created the EA position. Right now, the biggest problem is voter registration. We have communication issues. There's a little bit of the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. They do not work in our office. They do not work with us. They do not train with us. It's a problem. So there's a lot of miscommunication and issues with that office. But other than that, I think we have managed to pull the situation in and under control. And I think we're going to have a good November election. I'm crossing my fingers anyway.
Good. Well,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
yes.
One of the things that you brought up, and first of all, thank you for bringing all these things up.
Sure.
Because that's how we.
We've learned a
learn.
lot.
But 31035, I don't have it in front of me, but I presume what it says is you can't be an elected official and be an EA.
It's the restrictions on an EA.
And what you're saying is to expand that to make sure that you don't serve on boards appointed by other elected officials.
Yes. Which is what our EA was doing. He was on the Housing Authority, he was on Emergency Services Districts, which are taxing entities. Our county attorney read those sections and decided that it was vague enough that it was okay for him to stay on them. He was serving on them prior to getting the job. He had agreed to get off of them. But then the county attorney came in and said, no, he can stay on them. It doesn't violate the statute. He has since changed his mind and said he misread that and he should have gotten off of those things. But
you're
it's
saying-
vague enough that I'd love to see us
Fair enough.
address it.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Thank you.
Okay.
Representative?
Is that the reason why the elections administrator was arrested?
He was indicted for misconduct and theft at the Housing Authority.
Okay. And so, with respect to the voter registrar right now, I think that you've noted as far as the issues and the right hand not doing what the left hand is.
Yes, sir.
It seems more of a like a management or mismanagement issue with respect to the local commissioners court, right? Have you brought this up to commissioners court to see if they would integrate both offices?
They're aware of it. The legislation is written in such a way that if we're going to move it from one position to the other, like if voter registration is going to come back to the county clerk, it is done by the commissioners court, but both the tax assessor and the county clerk have to agree to it. The tax assessor at this time does not want to agree to it. And I can give you my opinion on why I think he won't do that, but he will not agree to it.
If you can share, and if I'm not putting you on the spot, what is your opinion as to why?
Oh, he's going to call and yell at me the minute I say it, but
I think it's important for us to know, to see if it's a statutory issue that we need to address from this end, or whether it's more of a local jurisdictional issue and commissioners court needs to get involved.
it's a toughie. The fact that he has to agree is where the block is.
Now, is that, I'm sorry to stop you there, and
Okay.
please keep whatever you're going to say, where I don't distract you, but I think this is important. Is that a commissioner's court guideline that is in place where both
That's the
offices?
law.
That is the law,
That
okay.
is the law. That's in the statute.
Okay, and what were you going to say?
And I guess I should point out, I was an attorney before I took this job on. I also, prior to that, had an engineering degree, and I worked with computers and did a lot of work here in Austin. I was, the Department of Information Resources was my baby way back when. I helped make that come into play in 1989, so this isn't my first rodeo with the legislature. So I look at the code a lot, and so I could probably walk you through several of them where I'd like, you should add a little language here or there. When we split the EA office, there was, of course, the EA position. There was what he called basically a chief deputy. There were two other full-time positions and a part-time. We split it 50-50 between the voter registrar and my office. Basically, he got two positions, I got two positions. He also got all the Chapter 19 money, which the voter registrar is supposed to control. In the past, when the voter registrar was part of the tax assessor's office, it was a part-time job. Basically, they worked for the tax assessor doing tax assessor things and did the voter registration on the side. Our county has grown to such an extent that that is now a full-time job. However, with getting the two positions, I think they split their time between tax assessor work and voter registrar work. Unlike in my office, the elections people are elections people, and that's it. So essentially, the tax assessor got two new people. Putting those two, even if they're working part-time on voter registration, they're still, that's like a whole new person he got. Not to mention some funding that he can get creative with. And I think he likes having that. He just went through a very contested race as well. And so having his name on the voter registration information was obviously pretty helpful with that. But I think those are the primary reasons why he is so interested in holding on to it, not letting it come back over into the elections office. And our county, the elections office is in its own building. So people come to our office and they want to deal with their voter registration. They want to deal with their voter registration questions. And what we're having to do is go, technically we can't, you've got to cross town about, a couple of miles and go to this other office. And the hours that they keep in that office are not as regular and open as ours. They're a little more restricted. So it's created problems.
Yeah.
And like I said, we have a communication issue, especially during elections, but we're trying to address it. This is local politics, I guess. But the way the law is written, I would have loved it if when the EA position was abolished, if it went back to the way it was before and not an automatic to a new office that hadn't had that authority in a long time. Mm-hmm. That would have saved us a lot of headache.
Now, when you first started noting the issues, I Googled to become familiar with Liberty County, right? And I figured, well, maybe the demographics are changing. You're having a huge influx you know,
Yes,
new
we are.
folks that are coming in. What is the current makeup of the local officials? Is it still, because from the looks of it here, as far as the data was seen, it seemed like it was still a solid Republican county.
The last voting that we've, at this time, all the local elected officials are Republican. We tend to vote 83% Republican in the last races that we've had.
Yeah, that's the data
The
that,
governor, the last presidential. I thought for a minute you were going into our population increase, and that has been addressed by the Texas legislature recently in the most recent session you had. They brought in, they were addressing, having a lot of hearings on the growth in Liberty County and how that's being handled, specifically a development area called Colony Ridge. They are an interesting problem for us because that growth, that development, since I've been in office, has been unbelievable. I mean, I can't even begin to describe to you how much our workload has increased and how many people have bought property and how fast they're moving this property. Interestingly, though, with that large population increase, and most of the individuals who are moving into that development, English is not their first language. They don't register to vote. For example, the school district in that area has had tremendous growth. They went from like a 3A to a 6A in a 4-year period. They need schools. The space, the kids are literally like this walking down the hallways. They can't add any more portables. It's bad. But every time that school district gets up for, puts up a bond election, it fails. And I think it's largely because the area of the school district that needs those new schools are not voting. The percentage of people registered to vote and the turnout for that area is very small. I don't know why that is. I just know that it is.
is your office doing anything to try to recruit, register and make sure? I mean, I understand that the voter registrar is really the one in charge, but it seems that the county, by its very actions and having two separate offices, is actually hurting itself from the continued progress, the infrastructure that's needed, the funding that we as a legislature could divert to your community that is growing. And that's what we want for almost every community in the state of Texas, unless I have one particular community out in my district, for example, that tells me, we don't want to grow. Don't bring us big box outlet stores or anything like that. We don't want that. We're fine where we are. But for the most part, every community that I represent, and I'm sure that in the rest of Texas, it's like, yes, you have these issues, these growing pains, but it seems that this is a great place for your county to be in if we could just muster and use the resources of the growth that you're experiencing and making sure that it's then going to the ballot box so that your voice can be heard.
No, we emphasize that a lot, that, for them to get the changes they need to be able to vote. They need to be able to have a say-so in it.
But like, is your office doing, if you know that they're mostly Spanish speakers, is it doing anything to educate them in Spanish materials on social media, through the mail, something like these are the hours of operation of the voter registrars, for example. Doing that sort of stuff to make sure that we're getting those folks that need to register so that then they can vote.
Within my office, we have 3 bilinguals that work full-time. They are I have a satellite office that's also in the area of the growth area that I'm talking about. There's a bilingual there. We work with people from those communities all the time, and we really emphasize that they need to be involved in their local government. There's a lot of questions about that development. that I think are at play. I think there's also a general mistrust of our government processes in general that might be cultural. That's the impression I get. But yes, we strongly encourage it. For instance, in this November election, we will have a early voting location there in that area.
You will? Wow.
Yeah.
Great.
And it'll be the first time that we've had one there for the full time. So we're hoping the turnout increases. We will have a bilingual person working that election. You know, we're really hoping, everything we do, of course, has both English and Spanish on it, all of our notices and everything. So we're trying very hard. I can't speak to what the voter registrar is doing.
Yeah.
I
Well,
know
thank
how
you.
he handles it on the tax side, though, so it's not encouraging.
Well, and that's sad, right? Because whether
Very sad.
whether you're mostly Spanish speaker and being a first generation immigrant and my parents just, you know, I think the world of them and what they were able to do for us and making sure that we made it to Eagle Pass and they started a small business and, you know, we're reaping the benefits, I think, of that, you know, immigrant, you know, work ethic. And so long as I think you're a U.S. citizen or become a U.S. citizen, whether you're mostly Spanish speaking or not, I think you should be entitled and that your state government should be putting enough resources to make sure that your voices, or you are a U.S. citizen, even though maybe Spanish is, or some other foreign language is your primary method of speaking, you should still have access and a right to the ballot box, just like any other U.S. citizen. And so I want to thank you for the efforts that your office is doing, and if we can be of assistance, please continue to let us know, because I think it is important.
I think it needs, leadership in the county needs to, help people in that area understand how important it is to be part of the voting process. How you do that, who the leader is, I'm not sure, but they need it. And it's been an issue. It's been an issue in our county. It's an extremely high growth rate area. The county's dealing with it on all kinds of levels, everything from roads to law enforcement and education, obviously the one I mentioned, and voting as well. So we have a lot of challenges with regard to
Well, I'll leave
our
you.
development.
Thank you. And I'll leave you with this, because I've recently attended at the speaker's, I guess he handpicked a number of us, and we ended up in Virginia at a leadership conference. And one of my Republican colleagues up there that also attended for I think it was Kansas, was mentioning how for the longest time that county was just a solid Republican county. And when then the demographics started changing, they started receiving a lot of immigrants coming into the community. And essentially at the beginning, like what we're seeing, a lot of this anti-immigrant sentiment that's going around at least for the last 8-10 years, they fought that. And then when their communities and their stores started shutting down, they figured we need to do things differently. And it was the commissioner's court in Kansas that started saying, you know what, we're going, in that particular county, we're going to focus in these immigrant subdivisions. And we're going to go out there and educate and make sure that we're training them and that we're working and that we're registering them. And he was giving me some of the numbers and some of the statistics and how some of these manufacturing then companies started going into those areas and started doubling down because now they had the labor and the workforce to be able to have that growth. And I think that that's the message that we need to send to these communities who initially maybe seeing some of these immigrants as, well, let's not go into that neighborhood. We should be embracing that concept and knowing that working together, we can make not only that county, but the entire state of Texas just better from an economic standpoint, from a standpoint of understanding that you are welcomed here in Texas, and regardless of which community that you may end up residing in or deciding to live.
No, I agree. And there's a lot of people in our county that they don't know who is buying that land, who's moving into that land. And they think that, they're able to vote without ID and registration and all the things that we require. That's another one level of misinformation that floats around that we get a lot of questions on. It doesn't matter, if you're from Mars, if you're not properly registered and you don't have an ID, you're not going to be voting in our election, and that's just how it works. So, but at the same time, when people are moving into our area, they need to understand how everything works and how to get involved and how to, do such things as register to vote and change your voter registration and, get involved in local politics. And they have not been doing that at this point, from what I can see.
Does DPS have an office there in Liberty County, like
They
where it can process?
Yes, they will. We're building a new annex in that area, and there will be additional offices for law enforcement and the sheriff's office and everything over there.
Yeah, I'm talking specifically DPS, which is the agent, DPS is the agency in charge where you go get your driver's license and make sure that then you're registered to vote.
Right.
Do you have an office in Liberty, a
We
DPS office
have,
in
we have
Liberty County?
two. We have one in Liberty and one in Cleveland. The
Uh-huh.
one in Cleveland gets tremendously long lines. And so that hasn't been staffed, I don't think, like it should be. But again, that's the tax assessor's issue. But DPS does have offices for driver's licenses in Cleveland and Liberty. We're kind of a large area. From one end to our county to drive it is about 45 minutes. If you're not familiar with where we are, we're sandwiched in between Harris and Jefferson County. We have Chambers to the south, Montgomery's up here. San Jacinto, Polk, Hardin are surrounding counties. So we're basically along the coastline in between Harris and Jefferson County, just above, Galveston and Chambers County, so near the coast. We used to be a large farming area. We're transitioning. We're in a heavy growth phase right now. It's interesting, all those rice fields, and my dad was a rice farmer, and my grandfather was a rice farmer, are now huge developments and coming fast. The growth around Harris County has happened with everyone, Brazoria, Fort Bend, Montgomery, all these. Well, we're finally getting our growth spurt,
Yeah.
and we're experiencing that right now.
That's beautiful. I wish you Godspeed, and you have our support on this end. And these are, I think, yes, there's a growing pains that you're mentioning, but I think this is a great place for your community to be in with all of this growth that's taking place. It's just, we need to make sure that from the legislative side, we are providing the right tools and the right assistance so that you can receive the benefits of this growth.
Well, one of the realities of growth is that it happens, the development happens first, but before you start seeing the tax benefits of it, there's an in-between.
Mm-hmm.
And we're kind of caught in that in-between. We have to provide infrastructure, but we haven't had our, tax revenues increase to the point where it's covering it. So it's painful. We're in the painful growth
Yes.
part right now.
Well,
But
thank
we're
you.
hoping in the future that it's going to be better.
Yeah, we're doing a similar thing up in Grayson. I
Yeah.
hear you. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Do y'all have any other
Again, I really
questions?
appreciate you coming.
Okay.
And we'll be, if you don't mind, I may reach out to you and talk to you about some of these ideas that you had also, and we'll expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I've got a lot of notes and a lot of little things I think that I would love to see us change. And I can send stuff through Christina and those guys too
I appreciate that.
as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you. Well, members, I think that does it for today. That concludes the agenda. Having no further business, and if there is no objection, the Elections Committee stands adjourned, subject to the call of the chair.